How you doing?
I'd like to call the February 25th meeting of the PSTA Board of Directors meeting to order. Our first item is if we would all stand for a moment of silence, and then Mayor Vivas will lead us in the pledge. Mayor.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Our first item is awards and recognition, and we have a special award, and I'm going to turn this over to Mr. Miller.
And I am going to turn it over to our security expert, Mr. Jim Egbert, to introduce our guest from the Department of Homeland Security, TSA.
Good morning. My name is Jim Egbert. I'm the Safety, Security, and Training Supervisor, one of the 3 members of the team here at PSTA. For the past few years, we've been involved in the TSA's baseline assessment, which is a baseline assessment for security enhancements. Back in 2011, we were the recipients of the Gold Standard Award. And again in 2014, we had the pleasure of receiving the same Gold Standard level award. And I'd like to introduce Sonia Proctor, who's the director of the TSA Surface Division, and Lee Kerr, who is our Federal Security Director here in the greater Tampa Bay area.
Mr. Chairman, my name is Sonia Proctor, and I'm with the Transportation Security Administration. I'm the director of the Surface Division. So I have the pleasure of overseeing all of the surface modes of transportation for security policy and industry engagement. So this morning, I'm really pleased to be here with your Federal Security Director, Lee Kerr, to make a very important presentation. And could Mr. Miller come forward? Very much a team effort, but this morning I would like to read a letter from our acting administrator, Mr. Mel Caraway, being presented from TSA on behalf of Mr. Caraway. Dear Mr. Miller, congratulations. It gives me great pleasure to recognize the Pinellas Suncoast Transit Authority for achieving the highest standard of excellence in your security program, as evidenced by the high scores on your most recent baseline assessment for security enhancement. The Transportation Security Administration developed BASE to support our strategic goals of increasing domain awareness, enhancing prevention and protection capabilities, and furthering response preparedness of transit systems nationwide. BASE is a comprehensive review of your security program, focusing on 17 categories identified by the transit community as fundamental for a sound transit security program. Your system attained high scores across all categories. We consider this caliber of performance as deserving of special attention. I commend you and your organization for the commitment and hard work that this level of achievement requires, and I wish you success in maintaining the high standard of security you have demonstrated. Sincerely yours, Melvin J. Carraway, Acting Administrator, Transportation Security Administration. And for those who may not be aware, this is not the first time that the gold standard has been awarded here at Pinellas Suncoast Transit. This is actually the second time. So congratulations again for the fantastic work, the outstanding performance on this assessment. Thank you very much.
I'm the Federal Security Director for Greater Tampa Bay, and I just wanted to say that we actually have had years of experience dealing with PSTA from the TSA, from our surface inspectors and our federal law enforcement. It's been a great working relationship. Kudos to you for great accomplishment and a commitment to security. So thank you very much.
It is really reflective of the hard work that it takes to attain this goal. It's not an easy accomplishment. Only 5 transit agencies in the country won this award this year. One of those two named as well. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. We are now at the point in our agenda where we're taking public comment. Public comment presents an opportunity for individuals to provide input on items that do not appear on the agenda. Public will also be allowed to speak on any consent agenda item other than ceremonial or ministerial items, such as the approval of the board's minutes during this public comment section of the agenda. Each speaker will be asked to complete a green card, which will be given to me by staff. Speakers will be recognized in the order in which the cards are received. Public comment is limited to 3 minutes per individual speaker, unless the board grants additional time. A group can designate a spokesperson by completing the appropriate form available from staff, and a spokesperson can then speak on behalf of the group, addressing the PSTA board for 3 minutes for each member of the group present in the audience who waives his or her right to speak up to the maximum of 10 minutes. And I would remind that the board that remarks should be addressed to the board as a body, not to any member thereof. And so in order of the cards that we have received, we welcome Michael McNeely to the podium. You have 3 minutes. Mr. McNeely.
Morning,
Good morning.
Morning.
Good morning, sir.
Mitchell McNeely. I have a concern to the board, should bring up. Last week, PSTA had a communication problem that had to do with an accident involving the county. The service kind of broke down, the communication service, and I think you should talk with the transit, the county communication between the sheriff, police, and yourselves to get a better understanding of this. Because there had been an accident on US 19 and a few other accidents. The North County bus system kind of came to a standstill. It affected some buses in South County, but not many. But none of the buses in North County was on schedule anymore, and everything came to a stop. If it came down to an evacuation, none of your buses up on this end would get anywhere. So somewhere down the line, there was a breakdown. So I think y'all ought to look into that and really study that again, because it failed in. Communication people in the office, like I said, get a good understanding of that. And I guess the police, from what I understand, also handled everything wrong also. So your buses didn't get anywhere. If you had an emergency on one of your buses, they couldn't get to them, from what I understand, because some of them was tied up in traffic along the way, especially the 19, the 60, they was caught in the middle of traffic, and they couldn't get anywhere. And other routes, that was also on like Marlin Booth Road, the 62 also. A lot of your buses was tied up. So if they had an emergency event, you wouldn't have got anywhere. So I think you should talk with the police officers up on this end of the county, the sheriff, and get everything straightened out. Because this was a major blow to PSTA on that event, which took place on this end of the county. Because y'all don't have too many service roads to get the buses moving throughout this end. And that was a big setback. So I think that should let you know something in the upcoming future if a major evacuation came to play. So I think that should do it. And I would like to know if you would invite me back probably in the future to talk about other things about helping PSTA. Because I ride the bus, I know a lot about y'all bus system more than y'all think y'all do. Than y'all think y'all do. As I get around and I see a lot and I hear a lot than y'all think y'all do. So that's all I have to say.
Thank
I
you.
hope you look into it, though.
Thank you very much, Mr. McNeely.
All right.
That sure was a disaster for the whole county, and I know there's several people that are already looking at how that can be managed in a more effective manner.
Message from 9016.
And so unless you have a comment at this time.
I'd just like to say, Mr. McNeely, he met with us last board meeting right beforehand, a half hour. We do value his input. He does ride a lot of our buses. He got to sit down with our scheduling team. And I've also, he has my personal cell phone number. He gives me a call all the time. We have invited him back on a monthly basis to meet myself and anyone who's available from scheduling and transportation management team. So I have offered that to him. I spoke to him this morning about it. And so we are. He's our eyes and ears out there. Sometimes he sees things we don't. So that's one thing I want to share with you. So we will be continuing our communication with Mr. McNeely.
That's right, and all I would say is we'll take a look at our communication, what happened last week. I mean, it was the day of our workshop, and many of the members here on the PSA board were very delayed due to that problem. But we have to be communicative with our customers, so we'll take a look at that. Thank you.
And also your emergency response people also. I see you got your award today. That was great. I hope you get it again in the future. This was a little setback this time. It might be a bigger setback in the future. And I don't want to
Thank
see
you.
that.
Thank you, Mr. McNeely, and we do welcome your comments. The next speaker is Vivian Peters. Ms. Peters, good morning. We have
Vivian Peters. I live in Largo, Florida. The 300X bus stop, they removed the bus stop in front of the park and ride. The pad's still there, the shelter's gone. I requested information on this several weeks ago and have not received it back. I was on the bus today coming down Alberton. lady rang the bell, assuming she could get off at the park and ride. And no, she had to go several blocks down the street to Everest University, I believe it. There's no handy bus stop close to park and ride. You want people to ride 300X to get to Tampa. If they're trying to connect from 59 or the other bus routes, there's no bus stop there. They come home, there's no bus stop there. And as everybody knows, Umberton is a mess.
Yes.
And it's a mess right in front of there. But they have finished that part of it, and I assumed that the shelter would be back and the bus stop would be back. So as I say, encouraging people to use park and rides to Tampa, well, when you can't get a connection to the park and ride without a considerable trudge, you're going to have people that are going to elect not to do that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Peters. Important comment that I think staff will be addressing. Those are the only green cards I had from speakers from the public. Is there anybody else that wishes to speak to the board this morning? Not seeing none, we'll move in.
There's one out there.
Raise his hand.
Oh, would you come forward and we'd like you to fill out a green card after you speak? But you need to go to the microphone. Thank you, Commissioner.
Hello, how y'all doing?
Good.
All right, my name is Joseph Best, and I'm here to speak on fruit drivers and mechanics that work for your company. I know every company is great in its own way, and also it has its own internal problems. But what I'm here to do is basically speak on behalf because they feeling like they're not having the equality. So therefore, we're talking about how to get enhancement and more communication and more fair treatment for the drivers and the mechanics. Basically, they have a problem with treatment for us like holiday pay. They feel that they haven't got the same privileges as the administration in certain offices. They feel like that it was unjust that they haven't got the same pay or the same raises within a certain amount of time as administration. And also, they feel that the union itself hasn't really spoke on the behalf of all the workers for us being equal. And also they talk about certain things for they feel like discrimination is being favored in certain aspects on certain employees. They feel that, like in the case of Ray Jones, they feel that he was involved in an incident December 13th, 2014. Basically, he was fired, and then they said it stated that he's intentionally basically refused to take action to endanger. Basically, that means he caused an accident on purpose. And basically, there's another driver that got in the same type of accident that wasn't fired at that time. And it was the same similar situation, but he wasn't fired. He was maybe dismissed or suspended for a couple of days, and then he was let back on the job, but wasn't fired. And also, they're talking about also like that in this certain situation, Ray Jones, that nobody ever got fired for that certain violation ever in the history of PSTA on one accident like that. Then it goes on to say and talk about when he was to come before the committee that he wasn't properly represented because he felt that some senior union members or office administrators basically frustrated his representative because he was a non-union member. So just to say basically, they also mentioned about John Pimenton. He was in a similar situation, and therefore he wasn't driver. Well, he was a driver that was not charged with anything, and he was found 100% at fault in that situation.
Thank you, Mr. Vance.
All right.
That information will be placed into the record, and I think the employee issues are really within the prerogative of the union and the executive director, and hopefully they'll be addressed.
Mr.
Thank
Chair,
you.
Mr. Can we ask a question, or we can't?
If you wish.
Excuse me, you said non-union members.
Yes, basically, in the case, they feel like non-union members felt like they didn't get the same response as, since they work for PSTA, they felt that it wasn't treated equally in a certain situation.
Well, my question that would be, I know union members are covered by a CBA, which is a collective bargaining agreement, which dictates pay and stuff like you're mentioning. But I don't know, how do we deal with non-union members, Brad? Is there covered up?
Even if you're a non,
It's a,
Could you come to the
so
microphone?
one size fits all, whether you're in the union or not?
yeah.
If
that
they're in the
administration?
if they're in the bargaining unit, it doesn't matter to PSTA whether they're they're dues-paying members or not. He's talking about non-dues-paying members of the bargaining unit. So
So everybody's a member of the union by default if you work for PSA, is that how it works?
not everybody in the union. No, there's certain jobs that are within the union that he's referencing. All bus drivers, whether they pay dues to the union or not, are members of the bargaining unit. They are covered by the collective bargaining agreement.
That's what I'm saying, that by default, they're members of the union. That's what I just asked. You said no. You
They're
said
not
all bus,
dues-paying members. They're not dues-paying members of the union. That's not a PSTA issue. That's between them and the union.
but
They are
I'm,
controlled, their terms and conditions of employment with PSTA are controlled by the collective bargaining agreement that PSTA negotiates with the union. That's
so
the way
you,
the law works.
so everybody you hire is a union, it has to be in the union, represented by the union? Well, I'm confused, 'cause you said, okay, explain to me, please. I'm trying to get it from my attorney, if you don't mind. I'm sorry.
Because they choose, the employee chooses whether they wish to be a member of the union and represented by the union,
Okay?
okay, individually. But as far as how much they get paid, how they get disciplined, what rules apply to them for discipline, that's all controlled by an agreement that is negotiated between PSTA and the union. Whether the employee chooses to pay dues to that union or not, whether he chooses to be represented by that union or selects somebody else or hires their own person, that's up to them when it comes to a disciplinary matter. But what rules apply to them applies to every single employee who's in the bargaining unit. Every single bus driver has the same exact rules, whether they choose to be a member of Tampa Bay Area Transit Workers Union or not.
So every employee over there is represented by the union, is what you're saying? Because when you say CBA, Alan, I'm not splitting hairs, but collective bargaining agreement covers the people under that bargaining agreement. And you're saying they don't have to be in that, and they don't have a choice, sound like it.
They are controlled by the collective bargaining.
So there's no choice. If you work for PSTA and you drive a bus, you're represented by a union, and their rules and regulations. That's what you're telling me, their guidelines. Is that correct, or is that incorrect?
I just struggle with the word representation by the union.
Well,
You can choose not to be represented by the union. If we, like Mr. Jones was terminated for a second Group 2 offense. If he chooses not to be represented by the union, he has every right to do that. Is his termination determined based upon the same rules that apply to every bus driver? Is he controlled by those same rules? Absolutely.
So similar circumstances should have similar consequences. Is that correct?
The rules, if they're very similar circumstances, similar facts, the rules would be applied the same to whether you're in the union or not in the union.
Okay, now I think that's what he's pleaded to. He said a similar accident.
But that's assuming that the facts he states are accurate.
I understand, but I'm trying to get to if they're being represented, like you said, even if they choose not to be a paid member of a union, they're guided by the policies of the collective bargaining agreement that PSTA and I guess yourself and staff negotiated with them, and they're guided by those rules and regulations. So
Right.
even if they don't want to be, if they drive a bus with PSTA, they have to be. Sound like it's not a choice. So I'm just trying to make sure everything is equal. I know where you're going. You're saying that's a problem with their agency, and I understand that. But
In Mr. Jones's case, he go into a grievance, he didn't want to be represented. My understanding was he just chose not to be represented by the union. He has that right to do that. But he is still controlled, his discipline is controlled by the collective bargaining agreement.
How does our policy state as it pertains to accident? Is that up under CBA, or is that a safety policy from PSTA and the board?
The collective bargaining agreement and the general rules that apply to address the actions
Discipline.
of Mr. Jones that led up to that involved that accident. And I just want to, so the board is aware, Mr. Jones's discipline is subject of a request for arbitration where they are proceeding to arbitration in that case, so that case is in litigation.
Meaning we shouldn't be talking about it.
Well, I'm not
I'd like to
talking,
limit how much we talk about the facts. I just will say that the facts as presented today were not the facts as
right, but what,
have I become aware of them.
but as a board member, it just brings some uncomfortness to me, knowing that you got people that are not involved in the CBA or not members of a union that got to be represented by it and guided by those particular rules and regulations. And my whole thing is safety. I know I asked Brad about an incident that just happened, I guess, at a Publix. One of our connectors ran over a woman, and he said he'll get back. They're still investigating. He'll get back to us. I'm more concerned about safety and the people driving these buses. Some are covered under members of the union, and some aren't. But my question is general: who determines the safety and what happens in safety issues? Is that the union, or is it the board, or PSTA?
No, the staff, I mean, led by Mr. Bradford and his staff, safety and
We have policies pertaining to safety and
They
accidents and
apply the
whatnot.
same policies to whether the employee's a union member or not. And in many cases, PSTA's management doesn't even know if they're a dues-paying member.
No, but you hit it around the head. Going to the policies, that's where I was trying to go.
So the safety
Mr.
and
Newton,
training-
maybe PSTA follows industry-wide National Safety Council guidelines anytime there's an accident to determine what happened, follows the rules to determine whether the accident was preventable or not preventable. That is totally within the guys, the safety experts that just got up here and received the award. Then, once an accident is determined to be preventable, if the driver was considered preventable, then the collective bargaining, the union agreement, has stipulations for the discipline.
Okay.
And then, in a case like this one where the discipline called for termination, then the union has a right to, grieve that and go to arbitration and all that.
No, I understand.
It's separate from the actual accident review.
No, I understand. I was just getting the policy, because we have a situation in our city where policies are being applied haphazardly. And if it's a policy, it should be a hard set policy based on the circumstances. That's all. And I like when I heard you say the administration set those policies. I was getting a little confused because I thought that was policies driven by the union, and I'm like, wait a minute. I mean, it's if safety, So I'm just wanting to be clear on that. I just learned something this morning. I thought they all was represented by that. I did not know that. Just found that out. Just found out there wasn't no Santa Claus, I mean, so you have to excuse me. I didn't know that. So when he said that, it's kind of, we got people within our city, and they call them at-will employees, but they're not represented by CBA. And we don't force them to be under CBA because they're working in that department. And I guess, but we do have policies they have to follow that are set by administration and
We have the
the
same
council.
situation here.
That's where I was going. Like Brad said, when you get down to discipline, that was in their shop. I was just more concerned with policy as it pertains to safety and accident.
Commissioner Newton, is that your
That's
question
fine.
was
I'm
answered?
fine.
Thank you. Thank you.
It was a little disturbing when he kept saying the union does this.
Commissioner Welch, did you have a question?
My only question was when the gentleman came up and he's left the room now, is he an employee? Is he just a friend of
Yeah.
drivers and mechanics? Who is he? What role was he speaking in?
He didn't say, and he escorted them out.
James, do you know if he's an employee of?
Oh, wow.
Okay, I didn't catch
I
what
thought he
said.
said I work for the company.
Makes a big difference with me.
I thought he said a friend, but I just wanted to make sure. That's my only question.
Say that to me.
All right.
May I,
I'm sorry.
I'm
Commissioner
sorry, I'm
Rice.
glad that Commissioner Welch clarified that, because if the speaker is indeed an employee, I think that as a board, we need to recognize that it took a lot of guts for him to come before the board to describe some conditions that he's dealing with. And I think we also, Alan, I know that you're using legal language and trying to describe what's the situation, but the speaker did make some subjective statements, and I think it's up to us to show some respect and listen to the subjective feelings that he's stating and describing. But to say that he may not be sticking to the facts, I think is maybe a little harsh. So I think let's listen, and we can certainly sort out the subjective statements from objectively what's going on, assess the situation, and figure out if there needs to be any action. But it kind of hurts my ears to have our counsel imply twice that he wasn't sticking to the facts.
Well, he made a statement that just isn't true, is not correct. Now, he may not know that, but he made a statement about the discipline of Mr. Jones is just not accurate.
Understood, and I don't know why he's not here right now. But.
All right, is there anyone else in the audience that would like to make a public comment? I do not have any other green cards. I really need you to fill out a green card in advance of speaking. I don't see any, so the next agenda item is the non-board committee reports. Ms. Mann from the Transit Riders Advisory Committee, welcome.
Chairman Johnson, Mr. Miller, esteemed board members, the Transit Riders Advisory Committee met on Tuesday, February 17th. Departing track member Susan Dargish was recognized for her service over the past year. After being presented with a framed certificate, Ms. Dargish shared some observations of tools that she thought might improve ridership, such as a free transit day that invites non-pass holders to experience the PSTA system. Following the presentation, Cassandra Borchers, PSTA Chief Development Officer, updated the committee regarding new member selection. There will be a total of 6 new track members and alternates joining our committee in March. Mr. Miller then presented a financial forecast for the PSTA in light of the defeat of the November referendum. This financial forecast is a precursor to the fiscal year 2016 budget that's to be drafted by June 2015. Mr. Miller then informed the track that board workshop was being facilitated on February 18th to address possible revenue resources, changes in service, and how the PSTA can meet its financial and fiscal responsibilities going forward. Scott Pringle with Jacobs Engineering presented the FDOT District 7 Candidate Express Plan that focuses on installing new express services throughout the region. This plan follows a study that has defined the most feasible station locations, identified a viable operating plan, and offers 3 potential service options. Next steps include facilitating public workshops and creating a partnership between neighboring counties that will allow for further express service development. And finally, as the Transit Riders Advisory Committee Chairman, I had the pleasure of attending the PSTA Board Workshop on February 18th. Throughout the workshop, I was pleased to hear many of you express that the board is interested in learning more about the rider's perspective on upcoming changes in service concentration. I would like to personally invite each and every one of you to attend the Transit Riders Advisory Committee meetings right here at the PSTA headquarters. They're held on the 3rd Tuesday of each month in the afternoon. Our committee is comprised of riders who represent a cross-section of Pinellas County. Track members include riders who are physically challenged, professionals who choose to ride, students and older members of our community who rely on public transportation as their means for daily travel, day workers, and young professionals who utilize the bus as their family's second car. As Chairman Johnson, who has attended several meetings, can tell you, I'm sure, we take our role very seriously in shaping the PSTA's future with the rider in mind. So please consider joining us at the next track meeting to be held on March 17th, right here at 4 p.m.
Thank you, Ms. Mann. Are there questions for Ms. Mann? Commissioner Newt?
Yes, is the gentleman sitting right there, does he participate in track, or has he been solicited? Does he want to? Do
He
you
is
know of?
not currently a track member. We just recently took applications to include new track members and alternates. I'm not sure if Mr. McNeely was one that was chosen.
Okay, I know we approved 2 more after the workshop.
I'm sorry?
I know we approved 2 more after the workshop, I'm the chair of nominating, but I was just curious because she seems to have a wealth of information that goes right in line with what we're doing with track.
Absolutely. And we invite public comment as well, just like you guys do. Mr. McNeely has spoken at the track meetings
Okay, so he's
as
been,
a community member.
He didn't desire to serve, you know?
Again, I'm not really sure.
You denied twice. Okay, thank you.
No other questions? Thank you. Would encourage you to attend their meetings if you have the chance. Thank you very much. Next agenda item is the report from our delegate to the MPO, Mayor Brzezowski.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. At our last MPO meeting, several things occurred. Just so you guys know, they are working with FDOT to do a corridor and transit study on US 19, which would include how public transit intersects with the changes that are being made. I know this is something that's been exceptionally important to our chairman, so it is moving forward finally. Additionally, I do sit on the search committee for a new MPO/PPC director. We have interviewed the 7 finalists and whittled it down to 2. The full MPO board will meet in March and conduct interviews as well, and Brad will be a part of an interview panel along with city and county managers. FDOT made a presentation on bicycle and pedestrian safety and talked about their roads moving towards a complete street design process, which is great to hear. And then finally, PSTA did make a request for STP funding for buses for PSTA. My personal observation that I felt is that many board members of the MPO didn't really understand how the STP funds work. They expressed strong concern that road projects would be deferred by adding buses to their priority list. I've subsequently spoken to Brad and asked for we'll talk about this later, but asked for some type of an education either through him or the MPO director as to regards to how STP funding works. There's some misnomers there, and I also think it would be important for us to assure MPO that we're not looking to them to be our savior. They are one of a number of funding resources that we will be looking at, and whether those other funding sources come into play or not, we still need the funding from MPO. Again, we'll talk about this later. It will be coming back to the MPO on a future agenda. I'm not exactly sure when. And that was a summary of the MPO meeting.
Thank you. Any questions? All right, thank you. Next report is from our representative on the MPO Local Coordinating Board for the Transportation Disadvantaged, Vice Mayor Johnson.
Good morning. The Local Coordinating Board had a very long, very exciting meeting on February the 17th at the MPO building in downtown Clearwater. Craig Hare, Pinellas County's Director of Emergency Medical Services, EMS, and Fire Administration, provided a highly informative presentation about his office's role in enforcing the county ordinances and rules which govern the provision of wheelchair, reclining wheelchair, and stretcher transportation in Pinellas County. And our local coordinating board had asked to have him come and explain, what's going on with this. The reason is Pinellas County is the only county in Florida where non-emergency stretcher transportation, like when being discharged from a hospital, must be provided by an ambulance. Ambulance service is significantly more expensive than other methods. And while the majority of the population may not ever experience this problem, some of the population experiences it quite often. It costs residents hundreds of dollars even when it's not medically necessary to have the services of an ambulance. The presentation ended on a very positive note with Mr. Hare agreeing to devote staff time and resources to a working group to gather more data and see if something can be done to lessen these costs. PSTA's mobility manager, Ross Silvers, and I will be taking part. The local coordinating board was told there's a slight increase in the official federal poverty rate. And when they say slight, it's minute, which has already been updated on PSTA's Transportation Disadvantage Discounted Bus Pass website. That's a hard sentence. Only individuals falling below the 150% of the poverty line can qualify for the discounted pass. And there's a whole bunch. Last but not least, Ross informed the local coordinating board that all concerns which came out of their annual CTC review of the PSTA have been successfully addressed and brought into full compliance. Just like with this board and the reports that we get all the time, we always go over any complaints, making sure the complaints have been resolved, making sure that we're providing the very best service possible, and on our board are the people that use the system. Everyone on the board in some way uses the system. So, are there any questions?
No questions? Thank you very much, Vice Mayor. The next agenda item is our consent agenda. Is there any item on the consent agenda that any of the board members wish to pull from the consent agenda? It's not seeing none. Is there a motion on the
Second.
We have a motion and a second to approve the consent agenda. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That passes unanimously. Thank you very much. The next item is an action item, 6A, the state legislative agenda, and I believe there was a handout at your place at the...
There was. Mr. Chair, this is an action item for the board to consider approving our state legislative agenda. Maybe to start the discussion, I would like to call on the chair of the legislative committee who has reviewed and recommends this, Commissioner Rice.
Thank you. The Legislative Committee met on February 4th, and we had a robust discussion about what PSTA's 2015 legislative priorities should be. So as you all see here, it's this one-pager, heavy cardstock. And we did vote unanimously to recommend these priorities to you. Brad's going to walk us through it, but I do encourage our committee members to please add their thoughts. The committee members are Ben Diamond, Mayor Doug Beavis, Commissioner Pat Gerard, Councilman Wingay Newton, and myself. So, Brad, you want to walk through it?
Yeah. As you all who attended our workshop last week know, we are looking at ways first to realign the current service, the current bus service in Pinellas County, by reducing expenses, being more efficient, and looking at all possible options for revenue. And then beyond that, looking to expansions or enhancements to the transportation network. Not in a silver bullet type way of Greenlight Pinellas, but in an incremental way, maybe with some pilot projects. And that was discussed last week. The legislative committee has been working on this since November, this idea of looking at our system incrementally for expansion. The legislative committee first tasked me or the committee with meeting with each of the Pinellas legislative delegation, and up until this morning, I have been doing that. And Chair Rice has also joined me on a couple of them, but we've met with almost all of the state House members from Pinellas and the 2 senators, including my meeting this morning with Senator Latvala. The idea, again, is to look at some key pilot projects. The 3 pilot projects that have been identified or studied in some way, either by the FDOT or by us or by in times past, are listed there under number 1. The Central Avenue BRT project, which really is not on Central Avenue, it's on First Avenues North and South, which goes from the beach to downtown St. Pete. The second project is one you heard and got a presentation last month about from FDOT on their express lanes to Pinellas County on I-275 that would have express buses running in them to the Tampa airport. And then the third project, which maybe no surprise was Senator Latvala's favorite, was, because it's in his district, was Clearwater Beach, express bus from Clearwater Beach to the Tampa airport. We selected, and the committee had the legislative committee had a lot of debate about whether or not to prioritize all the projects or exactly how to do this, and the committee recommends having one recommended project is probably more successful, and they selected the Central Avenue BRT project because that one is the most, by far, shovel-ready project in the region. It addresses many of the things that you, as the board, talked about at the workshop last week, provides connection to our major tourism economy and the beaches, goes to St. Pete Beach, and it is an express, much faster service than the current Central Avenue trolley is that goes successfully but slowly along Central Avenue. This would complement that with an express line basically from the beach and from the tourist areas to downtown, and then ultimately connects with the TIA service on 275. Over time, we would be able to build a network of this. This project is, as I said, shovel-ready in that the city of St. Petersburg already has money set aside for investing in this project, and a lot of study and design has already been accomplished. As you can see, the total project cost is estimated to be $16.5 million. That would be for the vehicles, for construction of stations. When I'm talking about stations, I'm talking about essentially similar types of passenger waiting areas to that if you've seen over in Hillsborough County on their Metro Rapid that goes north-south from USF to downtown. Essentially, a little bit more elaborate bus shelters and fair payment methods so you don't have to pay while boarding when you get on the bus. What I talked to Senator Latvala this morning about, what I've talked to Gray Robinson, our lobbyist, about, was that we would put in a request to, and we've already submitted this to Senator Latvala and Senator Brandis, to put in a request for the PD&E funds, the $1.25 million, as an ask, but then ask the legislative delegation to work with the FDOT to program the construction dollars over a period of years, to add it to the FDOT work program. The idea is that an individual member of the state legislature probably does not have, even with our esteemed senators, both on transportation committees, can't get in 1 year $16.5 million, but they might, their earmarks are usually in the neighborhood of $1 to $1.5 million range, but that the work program of the DOT is something that they can express support for, and that could be funded over a period of years. And Senator Latvala indicated support for that Of course, he said he was more interested in the Clearwater piece, but he expressed support. On the bottom of the page is the second project. This is called a regional priority. The committee highlighted this because this is support for the ongoing regional fare collection project. This is a new method that would consolidate all fare payment across the Tampa Bay region and increase the technology so that you could essentially board the bus and show and pay your fare by your phone, probably your smartphone, or buying a smart card at any one of the locations. We're talking about if you've been in a Target or CVS or Walgreens and you see those big racks of discount cards to Olive Garden and whatnot, that we would sell a PSTA pass on there, or a region pass. That kind of plastic card would have an account that you could download money onto, and that this is a region-wide system. There's been funds allocated to this, and we have agreed. We're working in tandem with HART to include this as a regional priority. On the back of the card are a number of other supported positions, not necessarily priorities that we would advocate for, but we would support these positions when and if they come up within the legislature. Of course, we're identifying our bus capital needs and then some of the other positions that the legislative committee considered. I know one of the items that came up during the workshop last week was a discussion that we should consider intra-Pinellas asks, not necessarily just these projects that go across that are not regional, but look at ways we might expand the existing service within the county. I think there is, which was also mentioned in the workshop, a preference by the legislators that I've talked to, at least, for services that are regionally significant. Not necessarily that they wouldn't be supportive of helping us out with our bus replacement needs or an individual route somewhere in the county, especially in their district, but they believe there's a better chance of getting funding for one of these regional BRT projects or services to the airport. I'd be glad to answer any questions or seek your approval of this agenda.
Commissioner Rice, do you have anything else?
No, I think Brad captured it pretty well. There are just a couple of things. I think it's interesting to note that in HART's legislative ask, they are also bringing a BRT pilot project in Hillsborough County, and they're also asking for, they have a regional ask for the regional fare collection as well. So that ask is coordinated. And did you want to touch on the bullet points we have on the back page? And why we have it on the back page? Okay, all right.
Questions from the board? Let's go with Mayor Brzezowski.
Thank you. And I caught what you said, Brad, so I just want to look at you as what your committee discussion might have been. So you're feeling, I mean, obviously we know the big immediate need we have is bus replacement. And what was your dialogue about that? Is it because it's not a regional thing, you didn't want to push for that in as one of your bullet points in your?
Well, the bus replacement is number one on the back page, and I think that, if I recall correctly, that we discussed that extensively with the ask for STP funds from the MPO.
Yeah. I mean, and I guess I was just curious as to why it wouldn't have been maybe a third bullet point, because it's the big need, and I mean, we don't know if we're going to get MPO funds, and so it's kind of like we got to get more eggs out there. So I just wasn't sure if I'm sure you talked about it a lot, so you felt that the MPO was the better route to go and not touch the legislature with it.
I think there was just also a sense of when you go in to meet with a legislator, you have, I mean, this is what we're bringing in with us to a meeting, and you only have so much time and so much bandwidth to talk about all of our issues. So I think there was a sense of really crystallizing the ask to two main things that they could, we could leave. I mean, we could go with a third ask and a third bullet and use the opportunity to talk about bus replacement funds. I think there's definitely some flexibility in how we present that information. But we were worried about when you present a laundry list of ask, then there's a sense that you're not really prioritizing the ask at all. Brad, did you?
And I would maybe just add to that as one of the upcoming presentations you're going to hear from Cassandra about the STP funding and the bus replacement funding. Some of the comments that I heard from the legislators, of course, was because I did bring this up as our number one need, is to look at all options. Of course, they're saying look at all options that you can handle locally before coming to me, and so I told them about the possibility of getting STP dollars through the MPO, and they were, of course, like, great, go for that, and then let me know how that goes. But, so I think that's sort of the sentiment of it. It is a priority. That's why it's bolded and it's number one.
No, I just wanted to understand what the dialogue was and the thought behind it. The other question I had, and that is the Central Avenue Bus Rapid Transit pilot. Where does this project fall in our capital improvement plan?
Again, PSTA doesn't have specific funds allocated to this project. St. Petersburg, City of St. Petersburg received an earmark several years ago for transit-related enhancements along this corridor that can help support this.
Right, but I mean, it's not in our capital program right now?
Right, none of the 16.5 million that we're listing here, or we're asking for, is in our capital.
Is the transit fare collection system in our capital plan?
We have received some funding from the state DOT on that project. I think it's about $1 million or so, and that is in our CIP. This remaining 10.4, which is the total project for the 7 counties that it would operate in, that the fare collection would be consolidated amongst the 7 counties. That's not just a Pinellas number, but that is not in our, that just complete the whole project, not in our CIP.
I understand. I'm saying, is it listed as one of our priorities in our capital
Yes.
plan, is what I'm saying?
Yes.
Okay, so the transit fare thing is in our capital plan as a priority, whether there's funding there or not, it's listed in some way or another.
It is only in the CIP because it has funding.
Right, but yet the BRT pilot in St. Pete is not.
Right, because it does not have funding.
Okay, so where I'm trying to go, because my next question is we're going to go advocate for this, and I'm not condemning the project at all. This is really more about process. What I see that we're asking for all the capital and the study money. What's the estimated cost of operating this going to be to PSTA?
We have that number. Again, some of that is already budgeted in that we have existing routes that go along that corridor that would be replaced with this bus rapid transit service, and so those operating dollars would instead be on this. But I can give you the estimate on operating costs.
Here's my concern, and really, it is nothing against this project. I support the project. My concern is that we're going to go to Tallahassee and advocate for this project, and my feeling is that the board hasn't had a chance to discuss it first and look at what all the other priorities are and make that broader decision. And I will take it back to the workshop as to what are our priorities. We haven't even determined those things yet. So I want to point out that what we're deciding today is not only advocating for this in Tallahassee, but that we are deciding this is a top priority project. Because it's not in, I mean, we've talked about this project for a long time. Let me just be really honest. I mean, it's not like it's something brand new. You all have been working on that corridor forever. So it's not, certainly, I don't mean to say that it's something new, but it's really, we're making two decisions today. And so I just want to point that out. I'm not saying that we shouldn't make the decision. I just want to be clear on the decision that we are making.
And perhaps I should have been more clear as well, but this PSTA BRT pilot priority, or just asking for a BRT pilot project as our top priority, reflects the fact that we have listened to all sides of what people liked most out of Greenlight Pinellas. So this reflects that this was one of the most, widely and deeply felt policies that people liked out of that whole community conversation. So that was the other reason why we're going forward with the BRT pilot project. Now, I understand your question may be, let's discuss more about which pilot project, but that's the rationale behind having a BRT pilot project at the top of the list in the first place.
And I'm fine with that, but you see where I'm going. It's
Yeah.
really more the process side. We haven't looked at what other BRT projects there are, so. But that, I
But
know
the process
time
is now, the
I
the
know.
legislative
I
committee is
understand.
presenting it, and you guys
I
feel
get
free
it.
to
I get it.
ask
Where
questions.
It's time sensitive and all of that, and I won't vote against it because of that. I'm just bringing it up that we need to maybe make our process a little bit better.
Commissioner Welch, did you have a?
That was basically what I was going to say. The operational cost side of it, we have not nailed down. I support the platform. I understand that the session is, underway. We have to have priorities. But my frustration at this point is we don't have that clarity on the forecast, on the assumptions, even on the this new route structure. We don't have clarity on whether that includes new revenues or not. I recall asking the question at the work session, did it include fare increases? And the answer was yes, but it turned out not to be the case. So we've got to get to a point of clarity on where we are fiscally, just for the service we have, much less funding for the new BRT. And I thought the BRT number was in the millions for a route. So based on the fact that we are cutting service now, where are we going to get millions of dollars to pay for a BRT route? I guess it's a kind of a dose of reality of where we are. Also, I'm a bit frustrated with since we're going to get to it, but the MPO request. Last year we talked about transparency and the board weighing in on policy issues. And unless I missed something, and I stand to be corrected if I did, but I don't recall the board giving the policy direction to ask the MPO for those dollars. And when I get a question from an MPO member, why are y'all asking for this $8 million? I don't remember us saying go forward and ask for it. So my issues are process as well. And we need to have another work session out at Collaborative Labs, because I just got a lot of questions. But in terms of, and since I woke up on the wrong side of the bed today, let me also say, we used to call these walk-ons at the commission. We need to get information before a meeting so we can study it. The questions on the reserves and the other issues, to have that before the meeting to have a productive meeting. So maybe after I finish my coffee, I'll be in a better mood. But, back to this issue, I support it, but we've got some real challenges on the revenue side. We need to understand exactly where we are to even fund a BRT project like this.
Mr. Scott, I believe.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, first of all, I'd like to thank Darden and her committee for all the hard work that they did putting this together. and it may sound like we're kind of shredding it up here, but they did a lot of work on this, and I think this is a fine list of priorities. Just a question and a comment on the supported positions. On item D, the statewide regulations to encourage Uber and Lyft transportation. I think that's a good item to have on there, because Uber and Lyft, I think, can play a critical role in first and final mile type options. But I don't think we should limit it to just that. I think we should encourage connectivity to all private sector transportation options, particularly at transfer points and intermodal facilities. So I would like to see us expand that to include that. And, you know, it says statewide regulations to occurrence, but then be available in Pinellas County. So is that really a Tallahassee issue, or is that really more of a local issue? Or are we asking Tallahassee to just take a leading role in trying to create some rules that can be applied more broadly on a statewide level to encourage some of these? You know, Uber and Lyft have been obviously pretty controversial everywhere. So are we just trying to ask Tallahassee to encourage some promulgation of rules and regulations to sort of smooth that transition?
This is an issue that Senator Jeff Brandes is taking up. So yes, there's already some significant movement on this issue. And I think we're seeing a pretty earnest attempt for the state to take a role in crafting out a policy, because what we don't want are, you know, dozens of different municipalities that each have a patchwork of regulations dealing with transportation sharing networks. So I think it behooves us to have a position on this issue. I think it's a great opportunity to continue to show support for an issue that Senator Brandes cares about, and it would be speaking to the reality of the workload and the issues that the legislature is working on right now. So that's where that came from.
And I agree with you, because it's speaking from personal experience. You know, you trying to service different airports and seaports and whatever, and they all have their own rules, they all have their own regulations, and different hoops you have to jump through and hurdles you have to go over, and it is just a nightmare. So.
And I believe, you know, and the reason why PSTA has a stake in commenting on this, it's part of just offering our citizens the ability to have more transportation options.
Right. Well, thank you. Good work.
Commissioner Eggers?
I was just going to, the only comment I was going to.
You didn't see me, okay.
Beg your pardon?
No, the only comment I was going to make is regarding the process as well, and that is that we're going to be going to MPO and trying to get some of those funding. I would think one of the first questions they're going to want to ask is about the process and why, you know, where's the money going to go to, and why is it going to go to the places that we want it to go to. So I think it's going to be real important to have that part of the discussion, so that they're clear, if there are going to be some funds made available, how they're going to be used. So.
Right. Thank you. Councilmember?
I can share a little bit more background on the Central Avenue BRT project. We did receive an earmark for it. We also changed our zoning designation to be more transportation oriented on that whole corridor. That is done. So we're going through that actual process. Normally what you do, and this is what they did down in Miami when Brad, myself, and Mr. LaCanta went on those, and I think some more board members went on those trips and saw the $3 billion projects coming out of the ground, is you have to be going forward to look at number one. The legislator, I attended the legislative session, the delegation meeting yesterday, and they were talking about just that. You know, Brad is dead on it. They want to know what you can do at home before you come to them. That's what they're asking about. And they know, just like we know, that the Pinellas MPO is the only MPO that does not have funds for bus replacement. They know that. That's not a secret. That's why they're asking us to make that ask first. But if you look at the money that the PSTA board has been blessed with the earmarks for bus replacement over the years, that have let the Pinellas MPO use 100% of that money to pretty much build roads. And you just heard complaints about those roads as it pertains to an accident and getting people out of town in emergencies and whatnot. The only thing short of the plan that we had for transportation going forward, which was labeled green light, was BRT and not fixed rail. This project has money already earmarked for it. The zoning has already been approved for transit-oriented development in that area for more increased density. The likelihood of getting funds for something that already has money funded for it and that's in line and ready to go is better than just coming up with a concept of something that you want to do. We can meet until the cows come home, but the fact remains that you still have an issue with transportation. And just like our chairwoman stated, Senator Brandon is looking for some solutions. He's a big proponent of Uber and Lyft. It's going to move. So while we as small municipalities wanting our home rules are sitting around, jerking them back and forth, we're going to be subordinate to the state when they come out on what we can and can't do. So I know St. Peter's moving forward with trying to find a way to make this work. Again, we spoke about transportation options, everybody up here, through this whole campaign. But the people decided they didn't want to be taxed for it. So just like I said in the workshops, we need to have paid options, pay-per-service options like Uber and Lyft and other options, BRT, people will pay more for it if they can get there quicker as pertaining to funding. And our CEO already stated that we currently have routes running up and down both of those roads. So we already have that infrastructure and funding in place in our budget. So to not go and ask for funds to do a BRT on that corridor, I think would be really short-sighted. I'm sorry about the way it came, but it's been in the works for years, as long as I've been on council and on PSTA. I don't know of any other things that we may have in our list of shovel-ready. I know Brad hit on a key thing. The reason it's not in the CIP because there's no funding for it. We did get money for the universal fares. I think we're working on that. He stated that. That's in our CIP because it has funding assigned to it. This BRT is not in our CIP because there's no funding assigned to it. But if we can get this asked from the legislator, I think it will be in there, and I think it's something that we can do quick, fast, in a hurry. We do have a problem as it pertains to transportation, of moving people around quickly, and I think they'll pay for a premium service. I know they'll pay for a premium service. Hell, I'll pay for a premium service. It's just that we have got to go in a direction to try to get these things done. I know it's in St. Pete, which is the largest city in the county and the fourth largest city in the state. But if we got other things that are ready to come out of the ground that's going to get people, move a lot of people around quicker, I'm listening.
Thank you. Anybody on this side?
Well, just to say, I don't hear anybody having an objection to the project necessarily. The process probably does need some work. And the other thing about the reason we didn't put the bus replacement on the legislative agenda is because it really is an ongoing expense that you really don't want to go to the legislature and ask for one-time money to pay for an ongoing expense. It just doesn't make sense.
Good point.
Mr. Dodd.
I just want to make a few comments. Since I serve on the legislative committee, I want to thank our chairwoman and the other committee members. As some of you may know, I spent 4 years working as a lawyer for the state of Florida in Tallahassee, so I had the privilege of seeing the sausage being made. And what I learned from that experience is that it's very important that the agencies around the state, the people that are going to Tallahassee to request money, listen to their local delegation and take their cues in terms of how we shape our requests from the people that we elect to service there. And so that's the process that Brad has tried to start, which he began in November right after the defeat of the green light referendum. And so I think that the result of this priority list is shaped to a large extent based on what we're hearing from the people who represent us in the process. And we're very fortunate to have some people from Pinellas County that are in senior leadership positions up there now, and it would be a mistake, in my opinion, of this agency not to go up with a significant ask. Now, that being said, I think, I agree with all the points Commissioner Welsh made. I mean, I think to make this a credible request, we have to have a real understanding of how we're going to pay for the operational side of it and where that fits in with our current fiscal challenges. And those are not easy answers to come to, but I think we need to have those answers ready to go. So, but I just want to commend the committee and the approach that was taken, because I think the approach of meeting with our delegation is the right approach to try to find a request that is going to be of interest to the people that can get it done.
All right, any other comments? I guess my only comment is to echo what Commissioner Welch said about having the sufficiency for the operating funding. I would suspect that somebody might say, okay, if we grant this capital, would you be able to go out and actually implement it and continue it? So I don't know quite whether we have that answer.
Mr. Chair, I appreciate the comments that are being made. But we do have the answer to that question. We'll be glad to present again the plan for funding. We are keenly aware of that every project, every public transit project that PSTA ever considers has two components: capital and operating. Just like the buses, we don't need the capital if we don't have the operating to run it. The state legislature will not fund operations. They will not fund an ongoing operating commitment to the Central Avenue BRT or any project that we ask for. They want to fund one-time projects capital, which usually is in the sense of capital. We will have to find the funds available to operate this service if we are so lucky as to get the capital funds funded for the operation. But we do have a plan for that that we will present to you. I hear Commissioner Welch and other comments about process, and I clearly apologize for the walk-on discussions that we're having. But we had our workshop a week ago, last Wednesday, and we have already mapped out the 20 to 25 requests that the board members made at the end of the meeting over the next period of months. It's obviously very important for you to have all this information. And so on the agenda today, what we felt was the most important pieces of information now are the STP funding, because yes, clearly MPO board members want to know why we're asking for $8 million. And so you're going to hear, Cassandra, that's the next agenda item. And then this question about how that capital funding for buses affects our reserves. And so those are the items on the agenda today. Next month, we're going to get to all of the assumptions. I sincerely apologize for not having this information any sooner than I did. We don't have to discuss it. We can discuss it next month, or delay, just move the process forward. That's okay with me. This was a unique circumstance when we just had the workshop last month. Usually, a lot of these issues are discussed at committees, and to avoid the walk-on and have this information available. As far as the legislative agenda goes, again, we do know we are keenly aware of the need to fund the operations of this project, but as you all know and as you've all stated, the legislative session is fixed in time, and it's starting now. But we will do whatever the board wants to do.
Mr. Chair.
Mr. Newton?
Patty was first. I'll go after her.
Vice Mayor Johnson.
I just have one question. Does the funding include increasing the TD fares?
On this legislative agenda.
Not that. I'm talking about the ongoing, I'm not talking about the ask. I'm talking about ongoing, what you were just talking about, how we're going to keep this thing going and how we're going to do this. Is that included in the funding?
We have talked about adjusting the transportation disadvantage fares, but that is not related to this agenda item that we're speaking about right now, the legislative priorities.
Hands going up all over. We've been talking about this for a while. At some point in time, we're going to have to come to a decision on here. I think I saw Mr. Diamond's hand up, then Ms.
I'll just be very, very brief. I think one thing we could do to improve the process going forward as it relates to our legislative priority list is to, as a legislative committee, get those priorities to this board earlier than the month that meets prior to session. And so as a member of that committee, I will work to do that going forward. I think that's an obvious way to improve the process.
And likewise,
Or do you want
So it's on the committee. She can go ahead. It's right in line with what they're talking about. Go ahead.
likewise, I take the comments about process to heart. I don't take it as destructive criticism. I think it's some good points going forward. And I think that we can also, I can take responsibility as chair to get some better notes to commissioners ahead of time to help give a better idea of the rationale and criteria that we use to arrive at our recommendations. And that is something that would be pretty easy to do, that at least would help people get a little better sense of preparation before the board meeting. And I'd be happy to do that since I like to consider myself a process person as well. So thank you for that feedback.
I just wanted to share that what we may want to do is what we did like in the workshop. Meet prior to, we know when the legislative session starts, okay? And also, I only have 10 months left on this board and on council before I be one of the ones you're asking for money, if it all goes well. But what we may want to do is like we're doing with the workshops, because I'm not on the planning committee, I'm not on the finance committee, so I don't know what they're talking about. The only way I get to see is when it comes to the days. That's it. So what we might want to do, that's a suggestion, Brad, going forward, is a workshop prior, maybe near year end, so we can find out what are our legislative priorities and what are our capital improvement lists, what are the things where we want to see those at while we're doing, maybe after we set the budget. Because we don't all get to meet like we did at the workshop, and a lot of great ideas came out of that. And it's unfortunate that you have 5 or 6 people determining what's number 1 and what's number 2. Then you get up here with the other 15, and now you got problems. So I'm suggesting that maybe for process sake, have a workshop just on legislative priorities and then the capital improvement. Because everybody does not sit on these committees. They don't. So they're not privileged to that. And I think that would alleviate a lot of these things. And the people they say they'll have their input. Hopefully we all have one number 1 instead of other different ones, and we'll go from there.
The job of the committees, as I see it, is to facilitate the board business. And the committees do not decide things, the board decides something. And I think these suggestions are great as far as future suggestions. We do have a legislative priority list that we have in front of us. If you have questions or comments on the legislative priority list, I'll take them. Otherwise, I think we need to
move approval.
Wrap up this discussion.
Second.
We have a motion. Did I hear a second? You do have a second. Are there comments relative to the motion to approve the priority list as presented?
Yes.
Commissioner Welch.
Thank you. And this was a productive conversation, and I do appreciate the work of the legislative committee. But as an accountant, I want to see the details and the numbers, and we don't have that, not just for this, but the overall budget. So that's really what I was speaking to. So my only request would be, since we have the O&M costs, can we have that as soon as possible?
Yeah.
Because I don't know if we're talking using the buses we have, and I don't know how you do that for BRT, because BRT is a different type of bus, as far as I know. So are we talking hundreds of thousands, or are we talking millions of dollars to operate this? If we have the numbers, let's get them to the board as soon as possible. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Are there other comments relative to the motion? Mr. Scott.
Just very quick, just to be sure we expand the supported positions to include the private sector connectivity.
Is there consensus to add that, or do you want to do that by motion in a second?
I'm fine with it.
I'm good.
Any objection to adding that to the priority?
Can you repeat it?
What I hear you say is on the
Item number D.
D?
Right, item D, yeah.
To encourage Uber, Lyft, and private sector transportation options to be available in Pinellas County?
Yes, particularly at transfer stations and intermodal facilities.
Now, you're going to have to actually make the recommendation on
Okay.
specific wording.
To encourage connectivity to all private sector transportation options, specifically to transfer and intermodal facilities.
Just point of information.
Let me get that down before. Encourage connectivity to
Private sector transportation options, specifically to transfer and intermodal facilities.
So to take out the words Uber and Lyft?
No, I think you can leave those in if I mean, because those are kind of hot button items right now, but to encourage Uber, Lyft type, and all private sector transportation options.
Yeah.
Okay, I need to do that as a motion and a second. Is there a
Make a
second to
second.
that? Okay. We'll vote on the amendment to the priority list. Is there further questions? All in favor?
We already have a motion on the floor.
This is an amendment to
This
that
is an
motion.
amendment.
This is an amendment to the motion to support the list as it was initially proposed.
So we have to have a motion and a second to do that.
We do.
We did.
I heard a motion and a second. All in favor of the
Mr. Chair, I called a point of information. I know you were writing. I don't know if that takes precedence, or do I have to wait after the vote?
It is, this is an amendment to the main motion?
Correct, but I'm asking for information. It was a motion for information. Isn't Uber and Lyft private sector? Are those private individuals, or is that a catch-all phrase, that the last thing that he said? I think the last was a catch-all, but before it was, I thought it was all private sector. That's what I'm trying to figure out, Uber and Lyft.
Mr. Scott, can you answer
But he's
that?
asking about private sector. I
Well,
thought it was private sector.
It is. Uber and Lyft certainly is private sector. I mean, my suggestion was to leave that in because those are really hot kind of button items right now. And so I think it's important to have that in there. But, you know, when you get deeper into other private sector options, I mean, such as, let's say, Megabus, for instance, or out-of-town tour coaches that are coming in, or in-state tour coaches that may come in, or whatever that situation may be. So that's my thought on that.
Didn't the clerk read the motion that we're voting on?
Well, before we vote, we need to ask if there's public comment. We do have one person that would like to make a comment on the amendment to the wording. You need to come up to the microphone, please.
Vivian Peter, Largo, Florida. I was not aware that PSTA is lobbying or becoming involved in the regulation of private entities. And Uber and Lyft, we all know the problems, but one of the things PSTA, I think, should be very careful about aligning itself with organizations that may or may not adhere to ADA regulations for transportation. And as I said, I was not aware that PSTA was basically lobbying for private enterprise. I understand where Mr. Scott is coming from, but I'm also well aware that he does adhere to ADA. But Uber and Lyft do not. It's a hot bus, and there's a lot of issues involved. And they're already in Pinellas County. So as I said, any more than you're lobbying for your competition. So as I said, that I do think this needs to be thought out, and it needs to be checked on even, do you want to be involved with private competition?
Transportation options.
Am I misunderstanding something?
I heard your comment, Ms. Rice.
We are not lobbying on behalf of private entities. We are lobbying in support of the creation of a state law that clarifies and creates a level playing field in which all of these actors abide by the law and provide safe, dependable transportation options to everyone according to the law.
Okay, that's,
That is ADA compliant. That would be part of what they're saying.
I was reading, what I read is, I think your explanation, but I'm also making an assumption of something else, because Uber and Lyft is so much in the news. So, and I do think that it does need to be, from an ADA point of view, it definitely issues do need to be addressed with anything that even subtly is an assumption that has PSTA's approval. I'm going to put it that way. And/or alignment with PSTA in any way. Thank you.
Yeah, first, I just got to make a couple of comments, and maybe I got up on the wrong side of the bed too, so forgive me. I'll try to make it short. And I'm new, so I don't get any latitude. But 2015 priorities that we're talking about, I don't think if we're going to do this, in my opinion, I think it's kind of a very quick reaction to a failed effort in November. And I don't think we're now talking about going to MPO, who we keep being told has never applied any monies towards buses in the past, but that's the way it's been. PSTA has not approached MPO about that, and now we've got a new partner on board. We're expecting them to acquiesce without a prioritization discussion. I feel like because Greenlight had a global approach to a situation, it wasn't as critical that things be so prioritized. Now that we're talking about more of an incremental approach, prioritization becomes more important. And I'm not sure that, well, again, I'm not going to say that the MPO hasn't had that discussion to some degree, but now they're being asked to become part of a capital partner on this. I think that whole discussion needs to be opened up in the coming year for 2016 priorities that may not have anything to do with what we approved today for 2015, because we're right smack dab in the middle of it. And it might, but I think that whole discussion, I think we're just, and I'm not, again, with respect, I'm not saying, I just don't want to be knee-jerk reacting to something without a carefully processed discussion, and I feel like we're just doing that. And again, I know you all have had a lot of discussions before the November 4th outcome, but I think you got to be careful how we move forward, and we got to move forward unified and not too quickly. So I just didn't want to make sure that if we vote for something today, well, next year we say, well, we voted for that last year, so that's where we pick up. I don't think that's necessarily going to be the case. There's going to be a lot of discussion between now and then. That's all I have. Thank you.
All right, we have a motion to amend the original amendment. There are further questions, comments on that?
Mr. Chair, I'd like to hear what we're voting on, please.
Could, Rachel, do you have that exact wording?
There are regulations to encourage Uber, Lyft, type, and all private sector transportation options to include transfer intermodal facilities. I'd have to hear it back again, but that's what I wrote down. Is that in the policy?
Yeah, that's probably fine-tuned a little bit, but that's the essence of it.
All right. All in favor of the motion as read to amend the
Original motion.
the original motion, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, that passes unanimously. Now we're back to the main motion, which was to approve the priorities as amended. Are there further comments on that priority? Hearing none, is there any public comment on the main motion, which is the legislative priorities? Not seeing any. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Nay.
Mr. Eggers and is a nay. All right. We've got a major presentation next. Let's take a 5-minute, let's take a 4-minute break. And we will need to be back at 10:40. Thank you.
This is rare.
We will start the next agenda item, which is the STP funding request to the Pinellas MPO. I guess Ms. Forshers is going to do that. Do you want to introduce the subject?
I would just say that this is an action item for you to consider approving sending a letter, which is found on page 51 of your packet, to the Pinellas MPO. The comment was made, I think, by Commissioner Eggers that the MPO has not been asked to provide funding, so this is the ask. No, it's on page 51. It's in the form of a letter. Cassandra, take it away.
Good morning.
Morning.
As always, delighted to be here, especially today when you all have woken up so happy.
I did.
So, regarding the Surface Transportation Program, I do have a presentation, but ultimately staff is recommending that we make a written request to the MPO to open a dialogue to add the bus replacements to the STP priority list. And I have a number of reasons that I'll go through in my presentation. But you have the letter in front of you that says we really do appreciate the MPO and look forward to working with them on this issue. As Mayor Bujalski mentioned, I do agree that this is an opening of a conversation with the MPO and will take some time to determine how this works in the context of other county needs. We have not in the past formally requested these funds, and so it is a shift in thinking for the county. So you've been talking a lot about financial projections of the agency, and I know that there's more to learn about those details. But just as a refresher, we have several different types of buses, and according to the FTA, they have different useful lives. Our buses do run longer than most other agencies, but this is typical of Florida agencies, that we have more mileage than years. And so a lot of times our buses, quote, age out on miles before they age out on years. That being said, we've discussed with you a policy decision to extend the useful years beyond the normal 12 for large buses to 15 years. We've talked to the maintenance department, and we feel that we can do this within the context of what we have here at PSTA. Despite that policy decision, we will still have a significant annual shortfall in bus replacement capital. And this does make certain assumptions about our operations. And so that changes if we start to make operational cuts. This changes if we start to outsource some of our certain types of routes like the express routes. The other thing to know is that in the past, we have received discretionary dollars for bus and bus facilities. At the federal level, this has changed a lot with MAP 21 and the reauthorization. This particular program, bus and bus facilities, was changed in a way that did not benefit PSTA, but may have benefited other agencies across the country. And so we have been able to get large numbers of bus purchases through this, and now we only get $1.4 million approximately every year. So the Surface Transportation Program is flexible funding that is prioritized by the MPO. And this money is used to supplement other projects, focusing on highway projects for right now. So this is a historical process for the Pinellas MPO to identify projects and prioritize them. But the most important thing about this list is that it is a list for multiple purposes. So that while you will see at the MPO a list that says STP priorities, this list is used for other things. And so that's important to note, that while we will ask to get on that list, STP dollars may be part of that funding. but that also creates some open doors for us with the state and other federal dollars. This is also an example of one of the projects that is in the work program. And this is important to understand because when we say that Pinellas County only gets $14 million a year in STP dollars, a small portion of that goes to the projects that are on the priority list of the MPO. So these are allocated by the Florida Department of Transportation. This particular project, US 19 from north of Whitney Road to north of State Road 60, has more than 30 line items of funding. Some are state, some are federal. You see 3 different line items that are STP, but those 3 line items total about 2.5% of the total project cost. This is not always true that it's that small. Sometimes, and in this example, the Gateway Express 18th Avenue connector portion is about 18%. So you'll see other projects that might be 60%, other projects. So that's a wide range of how the department allocates the money when the MPO says this is a priority project. We have talked a little bit with the MPO about other areas that give money to transit through the Surface Transportation Program. These include our neighbors across the bay. Hillsborough MPO prioritizes in a programmatic way. And while they have asked for in the MPO priority list $3.9 million, HART makes their annual ask every year based on what they need. And over the next 5 years in the work program, they get anywhere from no dollars to $8 million. 1 year they get 4, 1 year they get 0, the next year they get 7, the next year they get 8. So it changes from year to year based on what the Department of Transportation has available to allocate and what the ask is from the agency. Other MPOs across the state include Orlando that gives about $8 million a year to Lynx. Palm Beach County gives about $3 million to Palm Tran. And Broward County doesn't focus on the bus replacements, they're focusing on other projects, but they do prioritize those individual projects. This is not to mean that every MPO does this, but there are a lot of metropolitan areas across the county, and you can see some major ones in the state of Florida that use the STP dollars for transit. You do have in front of you the MPO item that came before that board a couple weeks ago, talking about prioritization of projects for state and federal funding. And you'll notice in that handout, and I apologize that you just got it today, it does say the MPO agrees that this is for the purpose of identifying projects eligible for this and other state and federal funding. So again, it's very important to understand.
We really can't read this at all, so.
Yes, there is another sheet in your package that is much more readable about the list, and it looks like this.
That was on the dais when we
Oh, that's
came
a better one than what I'm looking at.
No, that's all right.
It's a white one like this.
Yeah, so it does look
It's
like it's
bigger.
from the MPO package.
Yeah, okay.
The priorities listed here are ones that are
Stuck it in
funded
my-
in
I'm
the current
working on
CIP
it.
as well as
Not that
some
old,
staff
but it's small.
recommendations. So projects 1 through 12 on this list, some are already under construction, and the MPO will be considering taking them off the list because they are almost complete. So this project list will also change over the next few months. This is not the normal cycle for the Pinellas MPO. This was brought to the MPO's attention for the discussion of their legislative priorities by their chair. It is much more normal for the discussion of priorities to come later in the year because we as a county transmit these priorities to the Florida Department of Transportation for their inclusion in their work program and their fiscal year, which starts July 1st. So what we are discussing today and talking about today is to make a request of the MPO, a request that has never been made before in a formal way. While there's always, a staff member that says, hey, can we have some of that STP money? there's never been a discussion at the board level of PSTA asking the MPO for these dollars. And so again, this is a shift in thinking. It is an opening of a conversation, but a lot of other areas make their STP list multimodal. And that is really important to us moving forward, that we be on the list and that we be eligible for this and other federal and state funding options. We would like, with your permission, to send this letter, which does ask for us to work with the MPO and make bus replacement a priority project for the system preservation. Again, this is one of the top priorities of our state, is to maintain our transportation system first before we add capacity. And this fits into that framework of bus replacements as transit system preservation. With that, I will take any questions that you may have.
Vice Chair Wojcicki.
Thank you. Just a couple of questions. Why haven't we asked for the money before?
I can only talk about what I know is that we have received other discretionary funding in the past, and you will see that in a later presentation of each year and what buses we were able to purchase with discretionary funding. We were very fortunate to have Congressman Young fight for those dollars for us, and we did get a very large purchase in 2006 of 47 buses. So we've had a very young fleet as well, and we haven't had the problem that we're seeing right now before. So it could be a matter of different management by past administrations, also be part of the discretionary dollars that came to the agency.
And I know you're coming to us now, but you've already put the initial ask to MPO at the last meeting. Can you talk to us about why that timing occurred?
We were caught a little off guard that the item was coming to the MPO to talk about priorities. We did bring it up at the technical coordinating committee, so that's a staff level committee, members from the cities and PSTA. And so they asked us to come make a presentation about the comment that was made at the committees. The board discussion was not an action item and did not need to go back to the MPO committees and will be discussed by the MPO committees again this month. I believe also that the action item has been pulled from the March MPO board meeting and will likely come back in April. Again, that's completely out of cycle for what the normal discussion of priorities is. And we knew that this would be an ask because we had been talking at a staff level. We were just surprised that it came to the board, the MPO board, so quickly, at the request of their chair.
So they asked you to make the presentation?
Yes, they did.
And they went out of cycle with their priority list to the board?
Yes,
Do you know why they did that?
Their board chair asked that it come to the MPO board to talk about it in the context of legislative priorities. Because again, the list is used for a lot of other things, that is the list that came to them because that is the multi-use list that they have. And it is their prerogative to bring the item. I mean, we love the MPO staff, we love working with them, they're great. So we want to make sure that it is a very happy, friendly discussion, but we were just caught off guard by the request, as were they.
It didn't feel like it was a happy discussion, though, when I was sitting there. And just a couple of comments on that. I think in our letter, if we choose to move forward with this, which I hope we do, I think it's important to let MPO board members know that even if we get funding from other locations, we still need this. Because I think, folks, there was nobody said this, it was just my perception of the board sitting there during the meeting. was I almost felt like they thought we were looking to them to solve all our problems by giving us funding. And they need to understand that that's not what we're doing. That whether we get money from 10 other places, that we will still need this money. I think that's an important point to make to them, number one. I also think it's going to be really important that, and I don't know that maybe it's PSTA and the MPO director together, but I think it's really important that they're educated on how STP funds work, because it was very clear to me that they did not understand that. I don't want to say that blanketly, but a number of folks did not understand how STP funds work. There's only $14 million in that STP fund this year, and there's hundreds of millions of dollars of projects that are on the list. And I don't think people really understood that. I think it'd be really important for the director of MPO to describe how STP funds work, and that it's a matter of a priority list, and that it doesn't necessarily, as FDOT made a presentation that I'm not sure is really correct, or it said some things that I'm not exactly sure was correct, that it could indeed push off some of their road projects. And I think all of that has to be discussed with the MPO, that they need to be educated on that's not necessarily the case, or it can be worked around. I don't know who the appropriate person is for that, but it was just an awkward ask is what I'm just trying to say. I mean, the way it all happened. I understand that you were asked to do that, but it was very awkward. And then finally, you mentioned, and I just wanted you to ask if you could sort of clear this up. You mentioned in the letter, and you've said it before, that by being on this list as a priority, that this opens us up for other dollars from the state. Can you tell us how is that, and how does that work?
Well, there's two reasons. One is that, and you'll see in the MPO frequently talks about this as the priority list, and they do use it for other discussions. And so that's one way of just being on the list, that you would be involved in any discussion that has to do with priorities when the MPO is asked. The second is that there are times when other areas across the state might not be able to use their funding. And when you have projects ready to go and you are on a list, a formally adopted list, you're often eligible to be asked. There are times when we get a phone call from DOT and they say, we need to know in 3 days if you can accept X million dollars of money and put it to use by this date, because somebody else has released it from another part of the state. There are times when we get a call and we said, we need to know by 5 o'clock, all of those same things. And it just, unfortunately, I'd say fortunately, money falls from the sky sometimes. And when you are on the list, you can tell the DOT that you can accept that and for the project that you've identified.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Commissioner Welch.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Julie asked a couple of my questions, but I do have to say I just think this should have come to us first and then gone to the MPO. If their chair was asking for a presentation, I think the response should have been, well, our board hasn't approved this policy change yet, and then answer whatever questions you could. I watched the video, and it was very informative. You did a great job there. But one of the questions that I still have is the amount. And they mentioned that $8 million is probably not doable, and there's some MPO members up on the dais today. So what amount is reasonable, and also the time period? They were indicated that 2018 would be a problem in terms of knocking some road projects off, but 2021, I think, would be less of a problem. So when do we need these funds? The other question I had was, I'm not clear, and this is part of the next topic, but at some point we started spending capital grant funds for O&M to get us to Greenlight. Have those funds gone away? Are those the MAP 21 funds, or I thought that was a different bucket
That is
of
a different
capital funding? So are we still supplementing the O&M budget with those capital dollars? And the reason, not just trying to be a jerk, but we got into some issues last year because we weren't clearly transparent on some things. And if we are pulling money that we are getting for capital and supplementing O&M and saying we've got a capital problem, when the problem is really more O&M, then we need to know that. So are we still using those capital grant funds to supplement the O&M budget? Is just a basic question I have.
We are, but you'll hear more about that to a lesser degree than we have in the past.
Do you have that amount?
Yes.
What's the amount?
We are spending about $5 million roughly of our money that could be spent on capital.
And is that money at risk, or is that a formula that we should continue to receive?
That's a formula that we're anticipating continuing to receive.
Okay, and maybe this is for the next work session, but I've got a problem then in presenting this as a capital problem when we were getting capital dollars, but we're supplementing the O&M budget with it.
Okay.
You and I walked through a lot of interviews last year, and I don't want to call it one thing when it's really another thing. And that's part of my concern with this. But those are the questions I had in terms of the MPO request. I support it. I don't know what the right amount is. And it seems if we've got $5 million for capital that we're using for O&M, then it's not an $8 million problem, it's a $3 million problem. We need to come to consensus on what the details are and what that problem is and then address it. That's my frustration here.
Mr. Miller, did you want to?
I would just like to make a few comments on the STP list. Again, there's an action item before you to send a formal letter to the MPO. Again, the letter does not include a specific dollar request. And if you look at the Pinellas MPO list, this list that is at your place, this is the MPO priority list. You see there's no dollar numbers on it. I think maybe a mistake that we made last month at the MPO was talking about our specific dollar need for buses, 8 million, when that has never been, and that is not the process that the MPO follows. The MPO prioritizes projects and it does not allocate the money. The entity that allocates the money is the Florida DOT. The Pinellas MPO prioritizes transportation projects. So, and maybe the board has a different perspective on this. The idea is that the community supports multiple modes, not just expansion of roads as a priority project. So this list that you see from the MPO of 19 projects, there's no, to my knowledge, there's no magic number in 19. It can be 20. It can be 20. It can be 25. Whatever. It's gonna get shorter because some of these projects are gonna be done, theoretically. It is just getting on the list. Then, and supporting it from a policy perspective that the MPO should support multimodal projects, especially those that maintain our current transportation system and not just speak to expansion, as we just discussed on our own side. Again, so that is the ask, is just to get on the list. Now then, down the road, hopefully the MPO board will be accepting of adding bus replacement to the list of projects. I understand that there was a lot of questions being asked about, well, how does this affect the other projects on the road list? All that discussion is with the Florida DOT. They control the money. And as Cassandra showed in her charts on the road projects, the hundreds of millions of dollars, the Florida DOT, without any input that I know from the MPO, figures out how to fund the projects. And they will once we get on the list, they will figure out the available dollars that they can fund to PSTA. So it's a two-part process. Again, we are learning this ourselves. It sort of has a wraparound effect where it affects our budget then. If FDOT in July says, well, we can't give you the money till 2021, or we can give you this amount, whatever, that will then affect our budget and our capital program as well. So we're trying to work together on this. Again, what we're asking for is a policy, in my mind at least, it has been a policy recommendation that the MPO's priority list should be multimodal and include buses as one of their priority projects.
Let me just say that there's something, I went to the MPO meeting and watched that discussion, and I found that there was uncertainty on the part of the MPO members and that they weren't ready to present or to make a decision at that time, and if it was just a heads up that this is coming. But one of the things that I was confused with is is sort of the process that you just talked about. That STP funds come to the region and then they get allocated by this transportation management group, and so I don't understand how the process works. I think it's okay to just say at this point in time, we'd like to be considered and have an ask on this list for the future. I'm not sure where we want to allocate putting that as priority. Is it priority one because we're going to have to stop serving neighborhoods in need, or is it priority? I just don't feel that I know enough about this yet to really say what we need to do right now, because the way the letter is written, it reads that we have a shortfall in capital, as Commissioner Welch said. That's maybe not totally the overall perspective, but it reads like there's a specific request coming up for a specific date, rather than just to put it on the list of we need to be considered in the future. That's more of a statement than a question. But if you can respond to that, that's fine.
Which part?
Yeah, really.
Do we?
The process. So let's go back to the Florida Department of Transportation question and how their process works. They have a work program, and they take the transportation improvement program that is discussed at the MPO, and they put it into their work program, which then is an approved state transportation improvement program. And what you will hear when you talk to the Department of Transportation is they will talk about the new fifth year, because they're always working on those 5 years. They have projects. They need to make sure that they have the dollars programmed for construction before they even start a project. So their multi-year projects often get moved around based on the funding that's available. And even when you look at the draft work program that they put out and the final work program, those numbers change because certain pots of money will change. If we are granted the opportunity to get any dollars out of STP within that 5-year work program, they need to move some other monies around that they have already talked about. If we talk about money in that new 5th year, that becomes a new discussion, a new project. That's not to say that moving money around is hard. It's something they do all the time. But they do need to move projects around if we want to be within their current draft work program. So I know that's like really a bunch of, it's still really hard to understand and really hard to explain very quickly. But I think it'll be a longer discussion with the Department of Transportation about when do we insert ourselves and when can we. But as Brad mentioned, it is up to the department in some ways about when we get into the work program. They know the monies they have available. They know the priorities of the county for the projects that are already in there, and they know what they have available to them. And so when we make an ask, and you'll see this, it is an average of $14 million a year that is received by Pinellas based on all of the priorities and the asks. When you look at the work program, there are years where all of it comes to Pinellas, and the next year none of it may come to Pinellas because of the projects they have in the entire district. And so that $14 million is an annual average. And they have even projected out years later about what we have available, understanding that beyond that 5-year work program, a lot of that funding is uncertain and you are making some level of assumption. So we will be asked, if today we decide that we do want to get on the list without a dollar amount, understanding that we would be asked every year for that dollar amount, and meaning that in that 5th year. So they would be asking us, what do you need? Tell us what you need in 18, 19, 20, and 21. And then next year they'll say, what do you need in fiscal year 22? And the following year it'll be fiscal year 23, again, because they're always thinking 5 years out. I know that there were a couple other questions in the mix over there.
So we're really asking to have this included in the 5th year as part of the new process.
We will ask to be part of the list. We will then tell the Department of Transportation what we think our needs are for all of the years, including fiscal year 2021, so that they can decide if there are monies available before then or in 2021. Because it is our first time getting on the list, we would just make the ask. Even if the ask is $12 million one year and $2 million the next year at an average of 8, we can still make those asks every year and change those asks.
It's beginning in the 5th year, or is it the next 2 years as well?
We almost would play a little catch-up and just tell them what we need. So if we need something in 2018, we'll ask for that. We may not get it, but we should ask for it.
And do we have, what is the schedule here? It looks like this is setting something up to happen in September. Do we need to do this month, or do we have some time to wait for our sort of bigger financial projection to be put together?
We do have some time, but a limited amount of time. And there is no number ask at this time. So you do have some space to make a decision on that particular ask. But getting on the list, the sooner we start that conversation, the better.
Okay, we have an agenda item on the table. I see Mr. Diamond, Mr. Newton, and then Mr. Scott from that direction.
I want to thank you, Cassandra, for your work on this issue, and thank my fellow board members. Specifically, I want to associate myself very strongly with the comments and questions that Commissioner Welsh raised. If I were serving on the MPO and I received this letter, I'm not sure how helpful it would be to me. And I say that respectfully because, and I'm very respectful of the fact that there's this process that I'm just learning about in terms of the first step is just to get on the list, and then the numbers we work out later. But if I were serving on the MPO, I would want to know that that the transit agency coming to me for the first time has really crunched the numbers and has had some thoughtful discussions and done some analysis about what our true capital needs are going to be in the coming years. And so, for instance, there are probably several people that serve on the MPO that don't know a lot about the lifespan of buses, okay? And these are technical issues. And if we as a board make the decision that we're going to try to preserve our limited capital resources by using buses for 15 years as opposed to 12 years. I, as an MPO member, would want to know that, because I would want to know that this agency is coming to me having really worked through how they're arriving at the decision that they're going to need support from the Surface Transportation Program grants, if that makes sense. So, I mean, my thought is if this issue is not coming up on the March agenda for the MPO, that we table the letter and we continue to work on it to try to address, to try to sort of flesh it out more in terms of all of these issues that we're working on and what truly our capital needs are going to be, understanding that we may not get there, but at least it will get us further along than where we are.
Mr. Scott?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I am supportive of sending a letter, but with two changes to it. I completely understand what Commissioner Welch has said regarding we don't exactly know what the ask is going to be. So what if we just took that out and we just simply said we are going to have an annual capital shortfall. We know that. We have crunched the numbers. We have had, I mean, years of discussions about it. We know that's going to be the case. So what if we just said, I look at this as kind of an informational letter, more of an introductory letter to the MPO, is let's just remove that and just say PSTA will still have an annual capital shortfall beginning in FY 20 or 18. And then in the very last paragraph, I would just add one minor thing and just say we respectfully request MPO's consideration and look forward to working with you to use the resources allocated to improving transportation in our county with a comprehensive and thoughtful approach.
Good. Do you want to respond to that?
And I think those amendments to the letter would be fine. I would perhaps suggest going with Commissioner Diamond's suggestion, and we table this. We thought that this was coming up at the March MPO meeting, but I just learned yesterday that they now believe that there will not be any real action items on the March meeting because they're interviewing for their new executive director. And so this has been, I heard yesterday from the chair that it's been deferred to April. So we have another month anyway, and we can include your suggested comments plus maybe some more detail of the analysis we've done on our own capital needs. Both.
All right. With that in mind, Mr. Newton, did you have a comment?
Yes, I did. And thanks for the report. I see the MPO representative back there shaking her head when we talk about how the money is programmed. I don't know if you had any input, or would you permit her to give any input on how the money is broken up, because that seemed to be questions among this board also. I have attended I'm probably going to get the acronym wrong, the AMAC meetings with Ms. Carolyn in Tallahassee, and I saw the way they fund a lot of these projects. My concern is that this letter is not just going to the MPO. If you scroll down to the bottom, it says the PSTA board, the Honorable Jeff Brandis, the Honorable Jack Latvala, Pinellas County Commission, Pinellas County MPO, and the FDA, the FDOT director, and also the Debbie Hunt with FDOT of the 7th District, which we reside in. And also to the dollar amount has already been asked. $8 million has been floated, but again, as Commissioner Welch stated, and I don't know if Mr. Diamond knows prior to him coming on, that's where we've been living off the reserves and using some of the capital money to help with some of the operating. And I think that's what Mr. Welch alluded to, but it won't be as much. If you look at the dollar amounts that the different MPO from different counties do, it's a range. It's never a fixed dollar amount. And I think you heard us say sometimes they get nothing. Sometimes they get this, sometimes they get that. But the $8 million thing has been floated. I think to pull it back is kind of, insincere, because now it's like we coming after you, but we don't want you to know we want $8 million, but we want $8 million. I would leave that there, and I would make it a range like they have these other ones. If you look down below, where Hillsborough is 5 to 8, Orlando is 7 to 8, Palm Beach is $3 million a year, and then Broward does something totally different. That's all stated in the letter. But I also would like to know exactly how the work schedules are and how the money is broken out. I know you probably forgot more about that, Carol, than we can ever remember. And I think you can probably shed some light on exactly the way it works, so we'll know that it's not a program, not a project that's going to be effective. And one more thing I want to share. As to the buses and being able to be used for 15 years or more, every elected official that's in any elected body knows about stretching out the usable life of any capital item, such as a police car or trash truck or a Parks and Rec vehicle, to get more out of it. So we know about that. But I mean, we know about the effect and how much cost savings that would have. The only thing that would impede is how much you got once you initially sold it in the end. Because sometimes you use those funds you get when you sell it at auction and put back into buying more stuff. And if you run it longer, you get less. That's the only, but a lot of us do know about that.
Thank you. Mr. Dayton?
Yeah,
Mr. Chair, I couldn't hear from Carol, Mr. Chair, on the question.
The question I would have for the
Sarah,
board.
I'm sorry, Sarah, I'm saying Carol.
Is we're getting down pretty far into the details here, and we really have a policy decision as to whether to send this letter this month or to digest it further and approve it next month.
Motion to table?
Second.
All right, we have a motion to table in a second.
Point of information.
I
I
believe,
cannot comment on it because it's tabled.
yeah.
There's no more discussion now. We've just cut the entire discussion off. Is that really what you guys want to do?
Well,
Let's have a vote on the motion to table.
Haven't voted.
All
We
of,
just have a motion.
what, bigger pardon?
No, I'm saying we just have a motion. We
I
haven't.
know, but tabling means you can't talk to the item anymore. Shuts all
Have we
conversation.
Move on to the next agenda.
this is,
Our,
I think it's clear we need to sharpen our pencil. And as Mr. Lowe said,
We can't have this discussion.
we
Right.
haven't voted.
We can't have the discussion.
we have a motion to table and a second.
The second was, Mr. Chairman, based on the executive director saying he's gonna go back and work on the letter. So that's why I made the second. I think we've.
Right.
point of information. Can I get some information?
You can ask a point of information, but the motion to table is a priority motion if your point of information is relative to that
It
motion.
is. Are we gonna have any information when we come back to take this item off of the table? Because we have an individual now that can probably shed some light on a lot of the questions that we
I
have.
don't believe that's
No,
relevant.
I'm asking to the table.
I
mean,
don't believe that is relevant to the motion.
So
to
we come
table.
back from table, this is relevant to the table. We come back from table in the motion, not knowing what we know, but what we have now, and get back into the same conversation. Is that the idea?
We will have more information next month.
Oh, we will? Okay.
Yes.
So the motion is on the floor is to table this until the next month. All in favor of that motion?
Aye.
Wait a minute, we
Can-
need
can
to
I-
do them one
Chair,
at a time.
I didn't hear, I'm sorry, and I just want to clarify one point. You said the motion was a table to the next meeting. I didn't hear the part about the next meeting
Me either.
in the motion that was made. I heard it was a motion to table,
Right.
which is not a motion to continue. A motion to table takes it off your agenda. It only goes back on with another motion, taking it off the table. A motion to continue to the next item directs the CEO to put it on the agenda for the next item. So I just want to clarify that because the way I understood what the chair said is not what I understood the motion was.
All right.
Motion to table to the following meeting.
Okay, so can we just correct that to say it's a motion to continue it to the next meeting? So it doesn't require a second motion to take it off the table.
Okay.
Correct.
Okay,
So
so it's really a motion to continue till the next meeting.
let's do it
I think,
separately from the
just
names.
take a second on or the
That's the
second
second.
accepts the
Yes.
correction.
All right. So we have a motion to continue it to our next meeting. All those that are in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Nay.
We have 2 nays, Bujowski and Newton. I think I heard everybody else in the affirmative. So that item is continued until the next meeting. Thank you. The next agenda item is a resolution amending the rules and regulations. This was an item that was reviewed by the executive committee, and the executive committee recommended approving this. Are there, the changes are detailed. I guess it's not
I'll move
underlined.
approval.
Okay, we have a motion for approval.
Second.
Okay, what do we-
Are there questions on the?
Yes, I'm trying to, you said that you said that the items are,
Well, I thought they were highlighted, because we do not have,
At page 54 of your packet is a copy of the rules and regulations listing the items that the executive committee recommends modifying. Very, very briefly, that the primary purpose, the primary item of modification is something that the board requested in reducing the number of night meetings of the PSTA board to 1. That's the primary item. There's a couple of other, what I would describe as housekeeping changes, because we opened a Pinellas Park Transit Center, and so that is added as a place that we would post public hearing information. Those are the two changes.
well, there was also in here on the, where the, if the CEO has an emergency expenditure.
$100,000.
yeah.
That can be, that can be done with notification, but limiting the notification there. There's also on section 4, dealing with the transfer unencumbered balances between accounts, that has to be done with board approval. In the public hearings section, it previously said we had to have a public hearing before we could increase the service in an area. The Fed rules say before we reduce the service in an area. And I think the other one was that we used to say it had to be a central location, but if the service modification was in a corner of the county, we could have that in that corner of the county that could be considered central to the change. I believe that was the others that Mr. Miller didn't. Mr. Zimmett.
Just also along that one, Chair, on the system-wide changes, there were 3 public hearings that were required, one in Central County, one in South County, and one in North County. So we're changing that to just having the 1 public hearing and taking out the requirement that it be in 3 different parts of the county.
All right.
Is that to the fare increase that you're talking about, 1 public hearing for a fare increase?
Yes.
And also the 25% of
Changes.
bus reduction?
All right. Mr. Davis.
Yeah, in the future, can we do, when we do this, can we have the pieces that are being taken out shown and the pieces that are being?
Strike through and
Yeah.
highlight.
And I apologize for that. That was a formatting issue that occurred when we emailed the document from my office to PSTA, and I've corrected that with my staff.
So
they
you're
understand
just as
how to-
technically challenged as the rest of us?
Mr. Chairman,
Some of us are
Mr.
been
Chairman,
educated.
All right, Mr. Dunn.
could council explain the changes on the competitive bidding section? That's section 5.01A.
So the change on section 5 was additional language that was added for purchases over $100,000 if there's an emergency, giving the CEO the authority to make purchases. If an emergency exists, that he would promptly notify the board of directors in case of such purchase and the basis for the purchase on an emergency basis. Emergency is defined as a situation which threatens the overall operations of PSTA.
So in that paragraph, the last two sentences were added. And that was the only change in that paragraph.
Right.
Mr. Chair.
Yes, Mr. Moody.
In all due respect to the committee, I know they probably a lot of work on this, but this is another one, just like the legislative priorities. It talks about litigation and payment of less than $25,000. That's in there too, up under section 501.
That's not new.
Competitive bidding. That's nothing.
That's not new. That's something the board.
What's that? I'm saying I don't know what was changed and what wasn't, because all we got is this, and
Would
they
the
move
board-
approval. I'm sorry, they're moving approval and seconding it, but I don't know what I'm changing from. And I think you just talked to that, but it'd been nice to have that too.
Should we just continue this one too? And have that underlined so you know specifically what
Yeah,
you're
I think we need to be clear on what it is we're changing from
I'm-
too.
Is there any objection to doing that?
No.
These are not
I will
priority.
withdraw my motion, and I will make a motion to postpone.
To continue to the next meeting?
Postpone
Second,
to
to
next
continue.
meeting.
Postpone to the next meeting. All right, is there a second? to that?
Second.
All right, all in favor?
Aye. Aye.
Opposed? Thank you.
And you'll provide a summary.
We'll get a.
I already have one prepared.
That'd be nice.
But still,
More than
it's
a
still, even when you do that, that's helpful. Having on the front staff page a bullet point of the point that was changed and why it was changed gives a person, when they're reading the staffing, a very easy way of looking at it.
Yeah.
Rather than reading through, strike-through is important, but the summary is also important.
All right, thank you very much. The next item, information, is the follow-up from the workshop. And there was a attachment which you should have received today. And Mr. Miller.
Okay, so I recognize that I am at somewhat of a deficit here, given this presentation. Once again, I want to apologize about the process, but it's really up to the PSTA board whether they want to hear this. This is an informational item. There is no action item, and there was a suggestion made at the workshop last week by Commissioner Eggers that perhaps some of these more than 25 issues that the board identified as wanting further information out could be tackled. I think he suggested 10 minutes. I don't know if this is going to be the 10 minutes or not, but at the regular board meeting. So, again, we can talk about this more, but what I thought we would try to do was just try to give you some more information, even though I knew that it was, quote-unquote, a walk-on, because we just have developed it over the last several days since the workshop. But we can certainly get more information. It's really just an opportunity for me to present to you some updated information on what we've been talking about, and then for you to ask questions, and we can get more information from that. It's not the last we'll talk about these issues. So with that, again, we had a workshop a week ago. As you recall, at the end of the workshop, the question was asked, as you saw, three up on the board, up on the whiteboards there at the collaborative labs, three scenarios, three service scenarios. A scenario on the left-hand side of the room that was reducing the service by approximately 30%, assuming that we only use our own funds for capital bus replacements. We only maintain our current revenue sources that we have today. Then in the middle of the room, you'll recall, was a what we called realignment scenario number one. An idea, not specific, but an idea on how if we maintained a relative funding compared to our current budget, how the service might differ from that on the left-hand side of the room, which was a 30% cut. So if we maintained our budget structure through cutting costs, administrative costs, generating additional revenues, and those were outlined, Yes, they did include an increase in the fare, to Ms. Johnson's earlier point today, but those were outlined. And then on the right-hand side of the room, which I don't think many of the board members really focused too much on, was going from the realigned scenario in the middle, what would be some incremental ways in which we might expand the service down the road? And those were exactly what was on the legislative agenda for the legislative asks. I hear your comments, and I clearly hear Commissioner Welch's request multiple times to me to produce the assumptions, the detailed assumptions that went into all of that work that you saw at the workshop and that you'll see today and as we prepare into the FY16 budget. That is scheduled now to come to the committees next month and then the PSTA board next month in a format that I think several of the board members are familiar with. Pinellas County does this with their budget. They present a list of assumptions or forecasts that are the foundation for their budget presentation. And we're going to start doing that in a very similar format. In the past, we've done that as well, but we've just done it with the Planning Committee. And the Planning Committee has heard through the springtime all of the assumptions on personnel, on capital, et cetera, before the budget is presented in June. And now we're going to just we're going to change that, and we're going to present all of the assumptions first to the full PSTA board together, so you have that base of information. The other thing we're going to do is something that I think we've been successful or has worked in the past, or has provided the board some better understanding, is give you a calendar. Give you a calendar of meetings and timelines in which decisions will be brought before you, a multi-month calendar, so that you don't get all these 25 pieces of data you ask for at the same time, but you know when you're going to get them in a logical, strategic order in which things might come up, so that you get the information about the MPO ask on STP, say, before you have to approve the FY16 budget or something, in that order. Next month, you're getting a little pre-screening of the calendar of actions, but next month you're going to see these assumptions or forecasts and the route performance monitoring program. We talked about it at the workshop as a black box, as a way of evaluating the services and how we might prioritize either cuts or expansion or ways we might improve the service. And that's going to be outlined next month. Again, to the pleasure of the board, if you want me to stop, I will stop. But this month, what I thought we could tackle a little bit more discussion on the key question at hand that Cassandra walked through about the STP or the bus replacement program at PSTA, and then a question that Commissioner Welch asked at the workshop about, and again this morning, about the use of capital funds and how those have either affected either operations or our reserve balances. Specifically, these are comments that were made at the workshop. Number one, and I think Commissioner Mayor Bajowski mentioned this morning. We need to better understand the lack of funds for bus replacements. Why do we need $8 million for federal STP funds? Number two, Brad said not only have we not used reserve funds, we have not used reserve funds to balance our budget, but we've increased our reserves. Has our conversion of federal capital funds to operating assistance reduced our bus funding and boosted our reserves? Question mark. Commissioner Welch. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but that's what I wrote down.
That's pretty much what you asked today.
It's close.
It's close. It's close. I'm sure it's not exact, and we can clarify it. So number one, why do we need bus replacement funds? Again, what I have said and what this chart attempts to show is in the past, PSTA received a type of federal funds for our buses that is not available today. That being discretionary earmarks from the federal government. if you look at this chart, there's 2 rows showing about 10 or 13 years, 10 years in the past and 3 years in the future of buses bought and the type of money that PSTA used to buy those buses. Now, we did this in terms of buses and not, we started off making this chart with dollars, but with the different price of buses and the inflation, I think it's more clear to show the issue by showing the number of vehicles in our fleet. PSTA has about 200 total buses in its fleet. First of all, if you look at the bottom line, the local state funds, you can see that there's never been a penny of money of local funds, property tax dollars, fare box, state funds, ever used to buy any of the buses in PSTA fleets. This is not uncommon. I've worked at 4 other transit systems in my life, and every other one operates exactly the same way. And talking to the hundreds of other transit systems across the country, they operate the exact same way. The federal government has bought the buses for public transit in the United States for a very, very long time. The locals and the states fund the operating. That's the way it works everywhere. So I hear what Commissioner Welch was saying earlier about we need to define the problem. Whether is it the problem a capital problem or an operating problem? And maybe, you know, the fact of the matter is it's the same thing, and it's just a different perspective on how you want to look at it. But from my perspective, and with respect, maybe we see it differently, is the way the world has worked is that the federal government has provided capital funds for buses, and that number has significantly shrunk recently. The local funding, our funding, has never bought a bus, ever, and so to say that we should somehow doing that, that's a change. That's a change. It's a policy decision we need to look at. But so in the middle of the row is something called federal formula. So PSTA has received 2 types of federal funding in the past. Discretionary, that being earmarks that come based on either congressional appropriation or the federal DOT, and then a formula program. PSTA receives $12 million a year in federal funding, federal formula funding. That money has to be approved in an authorization and appropriations bill by Congress, which is debating this right now. But since the 1970s, and our CIP assumes into the future, we will receive a formula allotment of approximately $12 to $12.5 million a year. And you can see that we have bought a whole bunch of buses with that formula money. Those have been supplemented by discretionary funds. You can see in the future, FY 16, 17, 18, we're still planning on buying buses with the formula funds we receive. But again, largely because of that 2006 earmark, but getting 36 more buses and having to replace those, and then in 9, 10, 12, and 13 getting some earmarked buses, our formula funds are not going to be able to support buying all the buses on a consistent basis in the future. Okay, this is again, a repeat.
Can I ask a question on that last slide?
Yeah.
I want to be clear. What's the name of the federal formula funds? It has a number, 50 something.
5307.
Okay, so the federal formula line, that is the 5307 grants?
Yes.
So at what point, write that down before I forget it. At what point did we start shifting the $5 million out of capital into operating?
I'm going to show you.
That's coming
show
up?
you that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
The shorter answer is we've always used some of it. We've always converted, or at least back the last 10 years, 15, 20 years, we've always used some funds, converted them to operations and maintenance. It really ramped up when the recession hit, and we were trying to maintain service. And then we have been trying to winnow our way off of it again. we've been working hard at that.
Hey, Brad?
Yeah.
That $5 million conversion that we did, were those 5307 grants, or was that another?
5307.
Those were 5307 grants that we converted?
Yeah.
Just total number of buses that we have that you're talking about replacing here on these numbers. What's the total number that we have?
We have 200.
200 total buses.
200 total.
Okay. Thank you.
So, rough back of the envelope math is each bus lasts approximately 12 years. So you divide 200 divided by 12 to figure out we need to order about 15 buses a year. And so when you see the number in the table in the future of only buying 4, only having the money to buy 4 buses a year, or 8, that's about a little bit, about half of what we need. This tries to show that graphically, this graph, and I showed you this before. When you see these purple mountain range here, the bottom starts in FY15, the very left-hand side of the screen is where we are today, and this is looking out 20 years into the future. If we keep operating the way we've been operating, if the world hadn't changed and earmarks were still available, we would be up there looking for those 2006 buses to replace those in 2018, and that's that first mountain peak on the left-hand side of the screen. And then 12 years later, in 2030, we would be asking for those buses to be replaced again, and the increase over that 12 years is inflation of 3%, which equals $10 million. $10 million over that 10 years, or 12 years. That program is obviously not sustainable. To be looking for earmarks that don't exist in that sort of very lumpy fashion. So what I presented to you before was and again, just for information, we haven't taken an action on this yet, is a new CIP, a new strategy where we would smooth out those lumpy purchases and buy a consistent number of buses every single year, approximately 12 to 13 buses. And I proposed ways in which we might buy each bus and make it less expensive by buying regular standard diesels rather than hybrids, and buying a bunch of smaller buses rather than trying to have a consistent fleet of 35 and 40 foot, buying more small buses than we have. And I know I owe you a lot of the details on the assumptions, and I have those, but by doing that, you get to a smoothed out bus replacement amount that is this light blue line that you can see that hovers right around $9 million a year, or $9.5 million a year, on average, over that period of time. The problem is the PSTA's adopted CIP only allocates of the money that we receive from the federal government, which again is about $12.5 million in that 5307, we only allocate about $1.5 million per year to buses. The other money either goes to operating O&M or to other capital projects, because our CIP has a whole bunch of other capital projects like facilities and stuff like that. So that's the $8 million that we're talking about. The difference between that blue line and yellow line, on average, over the next 20 years is $8 million, compared to where our CIP is today. So that is how we got the $8 million. I mean, it's not rocket science. It's not. It can change. We're looking at ways of either increasing the yellow line by trying to get more federal funds, or decreasing the blue line, decreasing the cost of the fleet. There, okay. Okay, this gets to Commissioner Welch's question. These federal $5307, these federal formula dollars are referred to as capital dollars, capital funds. But the federal government has what I would describe as a loose definition of what is capital. They believe in transportation that maintaining a capital asset is considered capital. Maintaining a highway or maintaining a bridge and maintaining a bus is considered capital. So you sometimes hear of this as capitalized maintenance. Essentially, PSTAs, if PSTA wanted to, PSTA could take all of its costs in the maintenance program of PSTA, which is one of the most significant costs we have, and bill that to the federal grants. Again, the amount of money doesn't go up. It's a formula that drives the money. It's $12.5 million a year, and we don't forecast that increasing. It's $12.5 million a year, and it's our choice whether we want to use it to support the operations, or we want to use it for quote-unquote true capital, like buses or facilities. Every transit system has the same proportionate format. Every transit system, and I'm confident every transit system, at least that I've ever heard of, does convert some even convert all of their funding to support operations. There are no transit systems that I've ever heard that don't have any of that red area. The red area is the portion of our capital program that really we convert to maintenance or operations. So it's not available to buy buses or do other real capital. So when Commissioner Welch says, well, what is the problem? Is it really an operating problem, you say, or is it a capital problem? To my mind, it is a capital problem. Having an amount of federal 5307 funds is allocated to maintenance is the standard. It is the way that all of the transportation works. And we may just see that differently, and that's okay. As you can see, the red area on the chart, back in 2007, about 8 years ago, before the recession, about 15% of the annual allotment was converted to operations. And then the recession occurred here in Pinellas County, and the property values went way down, and the board and at the time, the staff made a recommendation to convert a substantial amount of the capital funds to support the operations so that the cuts to the service would be minimized. There were service cuts and fare increases that occurred, but they were about 6% rather than 20 or 20+% at the time, because they started using more of these federal dollars for operations. That's why the red line goes way up. You can see in the sort of peak of the recession, or when the property values hit their low point in 2011, more than 50% of the $12.5 million was converted to operations. That's the top there of that red peak. The blue area of the graph is the amount dedicated to buying buses, to replacing buses. And you can see that's somewhat proportional to the red line. If the red is lower, the blue is bigger, meaning we have more money to buy buses. The green is other capital items in our program. You can see the green was largest back in 10, 11, 12 because, number one, we got recovery funds from the stimulus, and we bought the real-time program. We invested in our customers. That was a good thing. And we also replaced all the concrete here at the facility, and that was a major capital project. But since then, we have reduced our other projects to focus on our buses. And you can see over the last several years, we have been working diligently at reducing the federal money that we convert to operating. The red mountain range is going down, and I hope to continue that. I don't recommend that we would ever make it zero, without looking at other options that other systems are taking advantage of, like STP dollars or new sources of funding that might exist. It might be the most conservative possible thing to do, but it doesn't. I don't think. At least I wouldn't recommend not look at these other options. It is important to continue to buy buses, as many buses as we can, with the funds we have, and that's why we hope to increase that blue area even more and reduce the red area. But probably zeroing it out is probably not what I would recommend doing.
Question, Mr. Chairman.
I had two questions at the same time. Mayor?
No, I was pointing at those guys.
Oh,
Okay.
go ahead.
I was just getting your attention.
Okay, well, Commissioner Welch, and then I'll go down to Annie.
So Brad, these 5307 funds, as I recall, as we were working through it, had traditionally been used, as you show on the chart, mostly for bus purchases.
Yeah.
You're saying the federal government allows you to do bus or operating? To use the dollars for bus purchases or operation?
Yes.
So, and this is why the assumptions are important. Going forward, what are you assuming that red area goes back to over the next 5 years? Does it get back to 30%, 15%? How much of those capital funds are we going to recover and apply towards bus purchases? And is that already figured in this $8 million number?
Right, that's a good question. So we are assuming roughly a flat amount, hovering around 25 to 30% of the available funding remaining. Right now, a constant amount. I believe maybe there's some slight changes trying to reduce it in the more immediate years, and then when we have projected out that $8 million over 20 years, we just keep a flat percentage. I believe around the 25%.
When do you get there? When does this line get back down to 25% for operating?
Well, we'll get you that information. Right now, it's around 30% or 29%, I think it is, and trying to winnow that down some more, but then probably hold steady. At least that's the current CIP, projected then outward.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Commissioner Eggers?
When you get down to the bottom of page 5 and you have the revenues, expenditures, and that kind of thing, on the revenue side, is that including the $12 million that we're getting annually, and some of it's expensed next to it, and then the other goes to capital? So are those numbers that we're talking about, this $12 million, is that included in these numbers, or are they pulled out and shown separately?
You're referring to a slide I haven't gotten to yet, but no, the $12 million is not included in that. That is just operating.
This is just
Just
our
the
own, this is our own revenue and our own expenses here locally.
Let me rephrase that. That is the operating budget of PSTA, and the operating revenues and the operating expenses of PSTA. It does include the revenues that we convert the portion, about 30% portion of the $12.5 million that we move into the operating budget and away from the capital budget. But it doesn't include.
So it kind of washes out then?
Yeah.
That 30% kind of comes in as revenue and it goes out as expenses?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Hi, Mr. Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Brad, if I understand the numbers correctly, right now we anticipate that $12 to $12.5 million a year is going to continue in the 5307, correct?
Correct.
So currently we're converting $5 million of that to operating. Well, that leaves $7 million, which will buy 15 buses. And currently, we're spending $5.5 million on other capital improvement projects, but only $1.5 million of that on bus replacements. So, I'm going to suggest that we need to take a hard look at our CIP program and really prioritize that, because even if we were to continue to spend that $5 million on operating, converting to operating, that other $7 million will buy us 15 buses a year.
Okay, yeah.
So.
No, I mean, that's certainly on our list. I completely agree with you. I've asked the staff of looking at all of our CIP projects and seeing which ones are not needs and which ones are wants, and that whole process. We need to go down that road. I agree with you.
Right.
Whether or not we can totally only buy buses and not buy any bus shelters or do any software license agreements or anything like that, I doubt it.
Right.
There's always going to be we have to buy staff, we have to buy cars, and trucks and whole bunch of other stuff.
Right. Yeah, I mean, there's other things. I understand that, but I think we just need to take a hard look at that because that is where the priority needs to be, and that's what we need to focus on.
Just let me ask a question here. Back in 2007, as I recall, the capital that we were using the federal money for capitalized maintenance. It was for the the tire replacement program. I mean, there were some things that we traditionally had done and used it for. We were not using it for the normal maintenance of engine replacement and that kind of stuff. Am I recalling that correctly?
Thank you. Mike, can you remember? But do you remember, like, back in those days?
Yeah, it was just parts and tires at that time. Yeah. Not the labor portion of maintenance. Okay, I was trying to remember that. Thank you. Other questions from this side? I think we interrupted your presentation.
No, so that concludes trying to provide you with some more information to that first question about how we got the $8 million, what our best capital needs are, et cetera. So I'll be glad to answer more questions before I move on to the next question. Brad said we haven't used reserve funds. What's the deal with that? Okay. Brad said not only have we not used reserve funds to balance our budget, but we've increased our reserves. Has the fact that we have turned federal money, capital money into operations been the reason that our reserves have increased or reduced our bus funding? So I'm just trying to provide some sort of foundational information about PSTA's reserves. And we can certainly provide more information. What I said at the workshop, and I believe is true, is we have not tapped into reserves to keep our balanced budget, at least in the last 3 years. And I tried to make that as simple as possible by why this math of actual expenditures, actual operating revenues minus actual operating expenses, we've had budget surpluses. Budget surpluses go to the bottom line, and they add to the reserve fund of PSTA. If we from all sources of funds, if we have more revenues than expenditures, our net position, if use like a business term, but adds to those reserves. And you can see in the first gray column what we're calling our general reserve. That means it's a one of three. I'm going to go into that. We have different types of reserves, but our reserve that's not otherwise allocated to our liability insurance or our 2-month operating reserve has grown to where it stands at the end of last year to almost $17 million. Now, there was a lot of policy decisions that the board made that allowed it to grow to that level, as you recall. We wanted to have funds available in the event that Greenlight passed because there was a gap in funding between the property tax elimination and the sales tax kicking in, and we needed some money to float approximately 3 months. There was another discussions about some of the reserves were built up back when we were in a lawsuit on the concrete replacement where we weren't sure if we were going to get any funds from that, et cetera. There's a whole bunch of things that led, but right now our reserves are quite healthy and growing. Another question says, well, and other transit systems have done this, did you just build up reserves by cutting the service? By reducing the amount of service you provide to the people of Pinellas County, to the customers? The answer is no. As you saw on the right-hand side, I put on there, we have consistently increased the service. We have increased the service each year to our customers, provided more amenities, lowered the average fare through the TD program and others, and increased reserves. And I would argue that from that last slide, it was also not due to converting the federal money to operations, because that has actually been going down. Again, we have 3 pots of reserves, 3 types of reserves of PSTA. The other question is, well, did you steal from the other pots to make that reserve go up? No. All the reserves have been going up. This first chart shows our operating reserve, which the board has a policy that says we shall retain 2 months' worth of operating costs in a reserve fund, I guess for a emergency, a hurricane, or some sort of situation like that. Back in the early days of 2007, 8, 9, 10, it was 3 months. It was 3 months of reserve. That's why the first 4 bars are higher than the next bars. And then when the recession hit, the board made a policy decision to drop that from 3 months to 2 months in 2011. The other thing that happened was back in the old rosy days, it was supposed to be 3 months, but it really was just a $14 million. They just kept $14 million, which was about 3 months, but it wasn't technically computed. Now you can see, since 2011, the number has been steadily rising. As our budget goes up, we do a computation of what 2 months would equal, and we put that into the reserve. That makes sense. It's now by formula. And so that has been increasing as the board policy dictates. Chair Johnson, you had to...
As I recall, the AYEY recommendation, their recommendation for reserves was it more than 2 months?
The Ernst & Young plan under Greenlight was to go back to 3 months.
Okay. Thank you.
But without Greenlight, I would not recommend going back to 3 months.
Good. Commissioner Welch.
And as I recall, and I don't know if this was before you came on board, Brad, but when we cut the reserves, it was to balance the budget.
Yeah.
So, why I cringed at the statement that we've never cut reserves, the message from this board throughout Greenlight has been referring to this cut of reserves to balance the budget. So,
going to the 2 months, you're saying?
Yeah.
Okay.
We went to 2 months and used that money to balance the budget. Mm-hmm. So when we say we've cut reserves, we've used capital for O&M, that's been our message. And so this chart identifies a big hunk of that.
Okay. In 2011.
Yeah, but we still did it. It was on the road to Greenlight. It was part of planning to get to a new funding structure. And so that's a disconnect on saying, well, we've never cut reserves. In fact, we built them. Well, we did cut reserves in 2010 because we had a fiscal issue, along with using the capital for O&M and other things. So that I think that's a disconnect on that statement.
Okay, I hear you. The next pot of reserve that PSTA has is our insurance reserve, our liability reserves, and we do an actuarial study each year to estimate our potential liability based on claims, mostly due to bus accidents that we might have to pay in the future. And an actuary gives us a number. This has also been a change since 2011. You can see the numbers were prior to 2011, the insurance reserve was not what I would suggest a fiscally prudent policy to have $2 million, no matter what the liabilities might be, just to keep $2 million in the bank for insurance. And back in 2011, we made a change to that, and we conducted an actuarial study, and that's what we have done consistently since then. So the amount of reserves dedicated to our insurance liability, as we've grown the service, has increased. And you can see those charts there, those numbers there.
Brad, are these insurance reserves to pay premium or to pay a catastrophic claim?
Pay claims.
So self-funded claims.
Yes. We have some umbrella coverage over a certain amount, but it's pretty high.
Brad, the insurance was also is this where we have the employees' contribution now, where they're contributing? They got anything to do with this insurance and reserves?
Well, it includes workers' comp claims and liability claims like accidents, both. Yeah.
Anything that just to point out,
can't hear you.
Please speak into the mic, yeah.
Okay, if you take a look here, you can see where we were talking about the 3-month reserve being high, and then we went to a 2-month reserve. There was, I think, in 2009, a period where we did not budget for a deficit, but we had a slight deficit. It was not a significant amount of money compared to our budget. But if you go forward to this slide where we're talking about the insurance reserve, at the same time that you saw this slide go down, you see the insurance reserves go up to cover 100% of our known claims, including our IBNR, incurred but not reported.
I'm sorry, IBNR.
Incurred but not reported.
Okay.
So this covers 100% of our claims, which is an excellent, excellent way of being fiscally prudent. So when you see one reserve go down, you see this reserve pop up. So I just wanted to clarify, other than a small amount in 09, and I believe again in another year where we actually performed better than budget, we were not dipping into reserves. Nor have we at any point dipped into the 2 or 3 month reserve pot.
Commissioner Welch?
Which, in terms of transparency, another question, we have budgeted reserves though each year. So when we go to the trim hearings, we've got a budget number. In fact, for this fiscal year, right, we've got $2.2 million that we're drawing down from reserves. Now, is that going to happen or not?
Staff is working very hard to find ways to cut costs to lessen that. Like last year, we had budgeted the use of $1 million worth of reserves to meet the deficit. By the end of the year, we did not need to use that at all. We had a $2.8 million surplus.
So if that keeps occurring, you know, should we budget for drawing down reserves when it hasn't happened in the last 2 or 3 years? Or hasn't happened since 2010?
Yeah,
because
that's an
you're sending a
excellent
message
point.
that we've got $2 million we got to draw down from reserves, but then when the actuals come in, you've got a surplus.
Right, and I think, you know, staff here over the years when I look back as to what has happened to cause these surpluses. What are we doing at PSTA to cause these surpluses? I think staff's done a lot in the areas that they can control. The big areas where we've had the positive variances have been in salaries, fringes. We've done a lot with health insurance costs over the years to cut costs or keep the inflation low on it. The other area is in diesel fuel, which we participate in a consortium, and we've locked in prices. Sometimes not where the market is like this year, but below our budget. We don't always know that when we're presenting the budget. We've also delayed certain new initiatives to be able to save money looking forward.
And the real estate market on the other side.
And the real estate market has come back. And the other thing is when you take a look in 2000, as you know, 2009, especially 10 and 11, we had some severe dips in our property tax revenue. And we've compensated for that.
Mayor Pajolski?
Thank you. You just mentioned, or what was mentioned was, you were talking about the reserves and how did we get surplus? I think Commissioner Walsh mentioned that, and it was talked about. And in the last couple of years, I know at the planning committee level where we looked at the assumptions and the overall budget projections, one of the things that we've talked about is making sure that when we do projections for a budget, that we are doing a realistic projection. We end up with surplus sometimes because we were too conservative in our projections. And so staff has agreed with that concept to be real with our projections. And I think that, I just wanted to bring that forward, but I think that's even more important going forward, that we need to be where we really think we are when we're looking at these next 5 or 10 years in our projections and assumptions, so that we can make really educated decisions.
That's right. And Mayor Pajolski has been on that the entire time she's been on PSTA and the planning committee. I mean, the being made significantly under budget is not a good thing. It's not necessarily a good thing. It's certainly a lot better than being over budget, at least that's my perspective, but being way under budget is bad budgeting, and it theoretically keeps service from going to the citizens of Pinellas County or the riders in a way that otherwise could be spent. So we're trying, I mean, what would be ideal is to be maybe 1% under budget by the end of the year, something like that. And we have made a number of changes, and we need to keep making changes to do that. It's a new philosophy of PSTA, and especially in this time where we're trying to maximize the service we can provide, that's definitely an area. Okay, I'm sorry, I'm getting to the conclusion here. The third piece of reserve, there's the 2-month operating reserve, and then there's the insurance reserve. And since 2011, recognize that, they have been going up. The third is then the remainder of the reserve that we're calling general reserve, or in the audit statements they're called undesignated reserve because they're not for insurance or the 2-month operating. And you can see it by this chart of blue bars that those too have been going up. That the reserves have been increasing, the general reserves of PSTA over the past, since 2011. Now again, before 2011, when the recession hit, as Commissioner Welch pointed out, that 2011 went down. We were, as Debbie Leas has caught up, it's a complex question, and the way to look at it is somewhat complicated. I don't think it is totally fair to say that all that money went into keeping the operations going. That money went into the concrete project. That money went into the other insurance reserves that the insurance reserve that we built up, and a whole bunch of other puts and takes that we'd have to really examine exactly sort of that historical practice. But if you set that aside and you look at just the last 3 years, what the policy has been over this board over the past several years, it has been to try to provide improved service while increasing the reserves. And it wasn't because we took the federal money and squirreled it away, because we've been reducing that, and we've been trying to put more money into the buses. Again, to me, this is how a public transit system is efficiently run. This is the way you run it. You try to maximize your reserves. You don't try to spend money and come under budget or meet your budget. You try to save money every single day, trying to reduce the cost, be more efficient, but provide the best service you can. I'm not that interested in cutting the miles and the service to our customers and just putting it into reserve. I don't think that's the right, just to show rosy reserve numbers keep growing and growing. I understand that. But the fact of the matter is PSTA has been an efficiently run system. Our finances are sound today. I do believe, based on an increasing amount of buses that we purchased, that our problem, to try to put it in one soundbite, is a capital problem. It is a capital problem. We have now updated our financial forecast on the operating side with the new county property values growing, and I believe that we can have, even though the current budget calls for a use of $2 million in reserves, I believe the staff will be able to overcome almost all of that this year because of not rocket science, not magic, but just ways that we can reduce the costs, and that's what we should be doing. Moving forward now, again, to me, it makes great sense to look at all options. It is not standard for a transit system to say we have to use all of our federal funds for capital, for buses only, not buy any bus shelters, not use any of it for maintenance. That's not the way the world works. And as Cassandra showed, the way the world does work is almost all transit systems get STP dollars for buses. They do get money through their MPOs or through their state DOT. I'm going to Washington, D.C. to talk to Congressman Jolly, who is on the Transportation Appropriations Committee, to see if bus funding can be restored and he will have a great influence over that on a national level. We certainly have to go down that angle as well. That increases that yellow number. Our number one priority, our core priority, is buses, and we do have to prioritize that over any other purchase. But we have been successful in working diligently to maintain our financial stability, and now focusing on, at least the way maybe I'm just looking at it, is it's important to look at that capital piece for the buses. That's my piece.
Brad, thank you very much for that presentation. If I'm doing my math right here, we have 17 million in general reserves, 5 million for insurance reserves, and 10.5 million for operating reserves. So we have a total of $32.5 million in reserves.
That's about right, yeah.
That seems to me like one heck of a war chest.
Yeah, and as I've shown the board with those other charts, if we do nothing and costs increase by relatively inflation, we can draw down that reserve for three more years.
Mm-hmm.
So it'll be healthy. It is healthy. It is a position that other transit systems would envy, that do envy us. But it gives us time, probably needed time, to come up with a direction on how we want to move this forward.
So the general reserve can be used for anything, really.
Yeah.
Used for operating, be used for bus purchases, could be whatever we want it to be.
I'd like to recognize myself for two questions here. And then I'll get to the mayor next to me. In the undesignated reserves on page 12, the difference between 2011 and 2012, was that when we implemented the 30% increase in ad valorem tax, property taxes?
Did that in 2012.
So
2012.
Did that account for the increase in 13, or was that part of what happened in 12? On this chart, on the bar chart.
Let's see. So these bars are shown at year end.
Okay.
So I would say the 2013 bar
is really where
is somewhat caused by that. I mean, Debbie has harassed me for the last 24 hours about the 2011 number. If the way the concrete project worked for you historians on the board was, we had a problem with the concrete. We tasked Alan with going and suing and winning, and then we went and got we used reserve funds. We said, well, we had to get the project completed, and the board approved reserve funds to fix the concrete, and then he won. And then he came back and he got a $6.1 million settlement. And so that number, as he says, you could show that 2011 number if we hadn't done it that way, if we had truly used the settlement, which we turned into the capital program. If we had used the settlement, then that reserve number in 2011 would be really about right in line with 2010 and 12. Maybe
so
too much, but
if we normalize 11 and 12, it would be about 6 million there. Instead of, I mean, all the 2011 doesn't increase all that much, does it?
Well, no. If you look at the blue chart, the blue bar, the general reserve 2011 is at 3 million, and the year before was 9.
Right. So that's the 6 million that we took out.
Yeah.
But then we got 6 million back the next year.
So then there was pretty much no change between 11 and 12, but for the concrete project, and then that's why I think the adjustment in the ad valorem rate really is some of that increase, but probably not all, of the 2012 to 13.
The other comment that I'd make is on the insurance reserve. It's been a long time since Merrill V. Dilly taught me accounting, but I think that the insurance reserve in more of a private system would be over on the, in the liabilities. So to classify that as a reserve is kind of unique to public. Debbie can tell me if I'm wrong, but.
You're correct. We have liabilities that sit on the book representing all the claims, workers' comp and general liability. But to fund those claims, it's on the asset side of the books within this reserve.
Okay, so, all right. Mayor Bajowski, you had a question, I believe?
No, it's just a comment because the question actually came up, and that was the fact that we do have this over almost $17 million in reserves over and above what is our policy. And yeah, there's many reasons why we have it, part of which was the bridge the gap. If Greenlight had passed, we weren't going to get the sales tax money for another 6 months to a year, and it was going to help us bridge that gap. But we have carried that we've had a large amount of reserves since the day I got on this board, and for multiple reasons. So I think we just have to all be very mindful that as we're in our committee settings, we need to come up with a formula that everybody can live with in order to what we're going to use it for. We can't just let it sit there. And how are we going to use it? Are we going to chip away at it from operating? Are we going to use it for capital? Are we going to use it to expand service? You know, do we need to use that to leverage getting other funding like borrowing? Because that's another thing that PSTA doesn't do. We pay cash for everything. We don't borrow. So it's a big chunk of change that could be a great advantage to us. We just need to be really smart about it. And I'm glad that everybody can see we do have a big chunk of change sitting there. Thank you.
One question?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm looking at PSTA buses replaced and funding source, number 4. And I'm looking at 12, 13, 14. The total buses are 16, 10, 8, and 15, I guess 11. And then I turned it to page 9, looking, or number 9, balanced budgets increase net income. I see 12, 13, 14, and I see our surplus going up. So I'm just wondering, is our surplus going, if we've got a goal of getting 15 new buses a year and we're getting 12, 13, or 16, 10, 8, does that mean that we could have been getting 15 buses a year if we had less in our net income here?
I would argue, I mean, that's what we're talking, that's the fundamental question, it's a good question, but I would argue no. It does not mean that.
I know that we were very careful about how we spent it and so forth, and it was carefully done, but if we're saying, wait a minute, where's our money going for the buses? Well, it's certainly not going into buses, so.
Right, but again, my point is that the local funds, which those reserves are, vast majority of them are local funds, have never bought a bus. Those are not at least historically, never been accessible. We have never used local reserve funds or savings and budget to buy a bus. We have used our federal money. So then that question is exactly what Commissioner Welch asked. Well, then maybe we could reduce the federal money going to operations, use those reserves, maybe incrementally, as Ms. Bajowski just said, and get more buses. Yeah, definitely.
One of the things that I see here is the use of the capital maintenance funds at varying amounts per year makes it tougher for me to evaluate the reserve
change or the surplus negative each year, because you've got independent variables kind of coming through here. So I would suggest that we may want to set a policy amount and not try to move it through the maintenance, which looks like income each year, which really is changes in allocations. Maybe the finance committee can take a look at that going forward.
Okay.
I have a question, sir.
Yes.
Fred, with the reserves that we have, at what point we have to start cutting the bus service? Well, as we draw on those to try to maintain service where it's at today. I mean, how long do we have if we're going to draw down that money with the projection of whatever property value increase we may get?
Right now, if we do nothing, or at least our projections, and I know I owe you a whole bunch of what the assumptions when I say this sentence are, but if we did nothing, we could take that $17 million and use it to balance the budget until FY 2019. And that would be consistent, even if we got no other money for the buses, those really become due in FY 18, but essentially FY 18 and FY 19 is when we sort of hit our fiscal cliff, both on the operating and capital side if we do nothing.
And then we'll have to, that gives us 3 years to try to figure out other ways to try to sustain the service or get more efficient service to try to sustain on the dollar amounts that we're getting now.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Commissioner Eggers?
Brad, thank you for this information. From my perspective, again, the person who knows probably the least about PSTA up here, it's great to start to get some terminologies for different types of reserves and how the monies are used. And to Councilmember Wingate's comment, I mean, I think we need to understand exactly how the system is working here locally, what outside monies we get, how much of that's going to operating reserves, how much of it's going to capital. I think it's just not only for us to all be on the same page with you, but for our residents and our partners, the state, and the MPO, to understand clearly what the issue is, whatever that issue is. And I think it just needs to be really, and then we all start using the same terminologies for whatever it is, like operating reserves versus general reserves or versus insurance reserves. And I just think it gets very confusing and I can lose track of what we're talking about. So again, I'm probably the lowest common denominator here. So if you're, if I can understand it, then maybe some of our people out there can understand it better. So I appreciate what you've done. So this is at least helpful for me to get started.
Commissioner Welch, did you?
I just want to say thank you as well. I think this has been very productive. I'm looking at a sleep number bed, so I won't be as cranky at the next meeting. But, this conversation and having the information, I think, is exactly what we needed to do. Still going to differ on that capital piece and where the problem really is, but the problem exists. But in my view, we're in better shape than I thought we'd be, especially with the $32 million in reserves and some other things. So this is a good conversation. Thank you for bringing this forward.
All right. Anything else on this agenda item? Thank you. Next is reports and correspondence. That's Mr. Miller again. We have a abbreviated format as a result of comments from board members and the executive committee.
Yes. In your packet is a new format for our monthly performance reports that focuses on the data. I would describe this as a work in progress to try to reformat it to get you the data. It tries to highlight the ridership. We had an incredibly successful month of January in terms of ridership, and that's highlighted right at the beginning of the report. The only other item that I would like to add before we conclude is we are smile because you are on a test of our live streaming capability.
Great.
Tell us at the end of the meeting.
Well, because I'm not sure if it's working. I haven't checked, but I don't know if anyone knows, but we have installed the cameras so that this is now theoretically, I think it might be working, I don't know, on our website. This is the first trial of it. We're also putting it up in the upstairs for the committee meetings as well.
All right, closing comments. Start with Commissioner Eggers.
No, I'm
Diamond?
I thought it was a very good meeting, and I just wanted to stress, we've discussed this in a lot of different ways for almost 4 hours, but I think as we rework the letter to the MPO to pick up on what Commissioner Eggers said, the goal is to provide a wealth of information. Even though I understand our position is we're just trying to get on the priority list, there are a lot of people that don't understand how this agency operates, and it's the first time we're coming to the MPO with a request. So I'm very encouraged by your presentation, Brad. I think that the information in it helps somebody who is new to these issues understand the background as to where we are with regard to our bus replacement needs and our reserve capabilities. So I thank you guys for that presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Great discussion today. I feel a lot better about our financial position. We're in much better shape than I thought we were. And then one other quick item on the LCB that I recalled as Patty was discussing it earlier today. At the suggestion of Ross Silvers, the LCB did create a committee to discuss the TD fare situation. So we have that committee ready to go whenever that discussion does need to take place, and I'm on that committee as well. So other than that, we'll see everybody next month.
Thank you.
I do have comments. Yeah, I want to thank you for the information too, Brad. I want the people watching and also my colleagues to be mindful that this does not in any way alleviate us from having to do a reduction in service because of the referendum or the new funding source that we were not able to attain through a referendum. All these reserves do is just buy us time. You're looking at, I think he said 2 years, was it 3 years? Was it 4? I'm probably miscounting. Somewhere 2 or 3 or 4 years. But we should be mindful and be looking at ways to more efficiently provide services and go toward more pay-per-use premium services. We still have our mandate is to try to provide transportation and support all forms of transportation to get people from A to B. A lot of people depend on us to do just that, and we got to be focused on that. The thing with the reserves, it was a plan to buy us over if the referendum had been successful. It has not. So now it's a safety net, if you will, to try to keep the service where it's at, to maintain this level and move it forward for about 3 or 4 years. I'm also, I'm not happy with the new format of the agenda. I know the executive committee thought that they could do that, and that's in their preview. But the employee accommodations only accommodates, I think, 1 page. I don't think it costs that much, and I know the ink couldn't be possibly that much. But the people, they are PSTA. You do represent everything that is PSTA every day to the people that need your services. They don't. Some people, you're the only way they get around. And not for you, they wouldn't be able to get around. From transportation disadvantage to our ADA clients, to people trying to get back and forth to work or to medical visits, it's important. And you're important to me. Madam Clerk, if you can email me a list of the people that receive accommodations, hopefully it won't cost that much. And maybe in my time I can read it so it won't be in the agenda, because you are appreciated. And I think it's not robbery to have you listed in the agenda to the board members. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Vice Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I am also appreciative of today's meeting. We've had some, sometimes difficult discussions, but that's okay. And Brad, you may already have this as a plan, but I'm hoping, you mentioned at the next meeting that you are going to, you and your staff are working on a calendar, if you will, to cover those 25 or some items that we brought up at the workshop. And I'm hoping that you will also work with either the executive committee or the planning committee to kind of vet that before getting to the board so that we can try to help make sure we're
on the same page.
And I think that we all have to be mindful of, we all want our answers right now, and so I think we're gonna all have to be willing to do maybe some extra workshops, because we only meet once a month. And you can only pack in so much once a month, and you can only sit down for so long before you start to become unproductive. So, you know, it's just something to think about. If we're committed to getting this organization going down the right road, we may need to consider, you know, a monthly workshop or something. So I just put it out there for everybody. I hope everybody has a great week, and I want to remind everybody that spring training starts next week. So visit your local favorite baseball team. Hopefully it'll be the Toronto Blue Jays.
Mayor Beavis, do you
Thank
have a
you.
ball? Do you have a ball?
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. I also want to thank Brad for the information. I think moving forward, because we pushed the MPO letter out, I think, as Commissioner Eggers mentioned, we all now kind of have the same information, and we're somewhat reading from the same sheet music, and we do cross paths with a lot of other elected officials. A lot of us are going to be going to Tallahassee, and I think it gives us a better understanding. I think when we first looked at the MPO letter, I don't think we really had an understanding of why we were asking for what we were asking for, and I think this couple of hours helped us better understand where we're at financially today and moving forward, and why we do need the assistance of the MPO. So thank you for that. And then lastly, this is a very important question. I've tried texting that number. I've tried calling that number. I'm new to the PSTA. I have no idea what that thing is scrolling across the screen there.
Oh, that's the go-to meeting.
I'll show you.
Oh, is it?
Meeting.
I'm like, okay, I'm like, oh, okay. I tried.
I don't know what.
Did anybody call you back?
No, nobody called me back. But that's not unusual. That's not unusual.
Those PowerPoints on the TV.
Is that what it is?
You can get them on your tablet if you download the app
Oh.
and enter that number.
I got you. Okay. Are there? Oh, well. That's funny. These. Okay.
Thank you, Mayor.
Thanks.
Commissioner Dayton?
Good meeting, thank you. Nothing more to add.
Commissioner Welch?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I didn't know what that number was either. I'm not worried about it.
You don't use that, do you?
I don't. Very productive meeting. Look forward to spending some quality time with the assumptions and the financial forecast next month. And onward and upward. Thank you.
Good luck on that bed, too.
Yeah, looking forward to it.
Okay. I would give you an update. At our last meeting, we approved sending a letter to the district secretary relative to the express bus lanes. And he did reach back and ask to meet with me and the executive director, and that is set up for Friday. So we'll have some information as to what we found out from there. I would say that this meeting, although it was long and it was very productive, I think it was an extension of the good discussion that we had in the workshop. The points that were made today, I think were all very relevant, and I too am looking forward to getting those financial projections. It's kind of peeling the onion. We peeled one layer off, maybe 2 layers off today. And so with that, our next meeting is March 25th. We are adjourned.